What's going on, Not Move Nation? Welcome to the Not Move podcast. Today is November 9th at 8:01 a.m. Eastern Time. I'll be breaking down today's football games with you guys. First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you to the subscribers, followers, supporters. We really appreciate you guys. And then a special thank you to BetUS, MyBookie.ag, Walmart.com, Open Goal, the NFL, and MLB Pro Shops. And let's get started here. So we got one game starting here in a little bit over an hour. So I'll just cover that game first before we move on to the other ones. Get a little situated here. All right. Looks like, this game between the Falcons and Colts. I'm just looking at the weather. It's in an open air stadium, what is what they're saying here on rotogrinders.com, ROTO grinders.com. And they're saying that the temperatures are in the 40s, so it's chilly, but not impactfully cold. So it doesn't look like weather would be too much of a concern in that game. Now, the Indianapolis Colts lead the all-time series against the Falcons, 15 wins to 3. All right, and the Colts won by 7+ points in 11 out of 15 of those games that they did win. Last that I checked, and I'm looking at the line now, the Colts are favored by 6.5. So, once again, 11 out of their 15 all-time wins against Atlanta. They've won by 7+ points. Also, the Colts are better against the spread this season than the Falcons. The Colts are 6-3 against the spread. The Falcons are 4-4. Now, Daniel Jones does have a 0-1 career record against Atlanta, but I was looking at the red zone offenses for every game today. Red zone attempts per game, red zone attempts allowed per game, red zone conversion rate, scoring touchdowns, and opponent red zone conversion rate. And I have, the Colts being one of the teams with a good chance of scoring touchdowns today. Atlanta seems like they're most vulnerable to running backs receiving touchdowns and wide receivers receiving touchdowns. So that makes me look for Jonathan Taylor, which really comes to no surprise. And then Josh Downs and Michael Pittman. Josh Downs does lead the wide receiving corps in red zone targets this season for the Colts. And then Michael Pittman is the second leader of red zone targets. Now, when I'm looking at the passing yards per game, I don't really see a passing advantage for either team in this game. I would probably have to lean towards the Colts having the passing advantage. Now, the Colts do rank second best in the NFL in passing yards per game, but the Falcons rank first in passing yards allowed per game. The Falcons are about average in passing yards per game, and the Colts, they've been allowing some passing yards. So they rank 26 in passing yards allowed per game. I think, the biggest positional defensive vulnerabilities that I see with the Colts relative to the other teams in the league are receptions allowed to wide receivers, receptions allowed to tight ends, and receiving yards allowed to tight ends. And let's go look at some of those statistics. So I said receptions allowed to wide receivers, right? Last that I checked, Drake London over under 5.5 receptions. He's gone over that in 4 out of 7 games this season. Now, he did not go over that in his only career game against the Colts, nor did he score a touchdown against them. And then Mooney, last that I checked, over under 2.5 receptions. He's gone over that in 2 out of 6 games this season, but he did go over that in his only career game against the Colts. So And, we can go look at target share for the Falcons. And right now it's London, Pitts, and Mooney. Let me go look at something else real quick, though, too. I think, Mooney, if I'm not mistaken, let me go just 1 second, please. Okay. Mooney. He's played, 6 games this season compared to Kyle Pitts, who's played 8. So it looks like Mooney's missed a couple of games. But, he still ranks 3rd on this Falcons team in target share. It just kind of depends on what you think is more important. Drake London's current statistics, where he's gone over 4 out of 7 games, the 5.5 receptions in 4 out of 7 games this season, or Mooney, the fact that he's gone over those receptions in 1 career game against the Colts. I think the more current data probably is better, so I have to lean more towards Drake London going over those receptions, although he didn't go over that in his only career game against the Colts. But the Colts, they rank 2nd worst in receptions allowed to wide receivers. So, especially if Atlanta's trailing in this game, I think targeting some of these Atlanta wide receivers and tight ends, and even Bijan Robinson for some receptions could be advantageous here. Now, I think for the Falcons, my favorite prop's going to be Kyle Pitts over the 47.5 receiving yards is what it was listed at last that I checked. He's gone over that in half of his games this season and went over that in his only career game against the Colts. He also scored a touchdown in his only career game against the Colts. And the Colts allow the 2nd most receiving yards to tight ends. They also allow the 2nd most receptions to tight ends. Last that I checked, Pitts' receptions were at 4.5. He's also gone over that in half of his games this year, but he did not go over that in his only career game against the Colts. So, let me backtrack real quick because Robinson, I mentioned that Mooney was the 3rd leader in target share on this team. It's actually Robinson. Now that I scroll down and look at this running back selection here. So, Robinson ranks 3rd and then Mooney 4th. But once again, Mooney's played 6 games compared to, like Kyle Pitts, who's played 8. I think probably Robinson's also played 8. So, the Colts, they've allowed the 9th most receptions to running backs this season. Last that I checked, Robinson's over-under was 4.5 receptions. He's gone over that in 5 out of 8 games this season, and he also went over that in his only career game against the Colts. So I think that's a viable option as well. And, the Colts, they are much more vulnerable with their pass defense and rush defense. They rank 4th best in the NFL in rushing yards allowed per game. So, hey, what's going on, Ivan? Good to see you here today. Hope you're having a great morning so far. Thank you for joining. I didn't really look at Bijan Robinson's rushing yards. If you're getting a good line on it, sure. But, the Colts do rank 4th best in rushing yards allowed per game. Now let's touch up on the Colts real quick. I said that I think the Colts are one of the better teams that have a chance to score some touchdowns today. And the first guy I got to look at is Jonathan Taylor. Atlanta has allowed the most receiving touchdowns to running backs this season. Jonathan Taylor has 2 games this season where he's had 1 receiving touchdown. He's also scored a touchdown in 1 out of he also scored a touchdown in his only career game against Atlanta. So yeah, he can run the ball. Don't get me wrong. And he could run it in, but I think he may have a better chance of catching one today simply because the Falcons have allowed the most receiving touchdowns to running backs, and he's capable of doing that. Now, when I'm looking at the rushing touchdowns allowed by the Falcons by running backs, they haven't allowed a whole lot this year. They've allowed the third fewest. But, Jonathan Taylor is elite, and he could probably get a rushing touchdown against any team in the league. And then I was looking at Josh Downs or Pittman. I think I already mentioned that at the start. But, yeah, Josh Downs leads the wide receiving corp in target shares in red zone target shares. In red zone targets this season. Josh Downs leads this team, and then Michael Pittman. I don't believe either of those guys had a touchdown, though, in games against the Falcons if they've ever played against them. Let me just look real quick. Josh Downs versus Falcons stats. Yeah, I don't think nothing even came up for that. What about Michael Pittman? Pittman and Pitts? Michael Pittman. Let's see if he's ever played against the Falcons. I mean, I'm pretty sure I checked this earlier, and I just didn't see that he got one against them. But let's double check that. I don't even know if he's ever played against Atlanta. No, it doesn't look like he or Downs have played against Atlanta. You might want to double check me on that. But yeah, so I'd be leaning towards those guys. And then let me look at rushing plays. I'm just trying to see if the Falcons give up big gains on the ground. Now, whenever the Falcons, their rush defense ranks 23rd in rushing yards allowed per game, and they rank 20th in opponent rushing yards allowed per game. So they're below average in allowing teams to run the ball on them in regards to picking up yardage. And Jonathan Taylor is the best in the NFL in rush yards per attempt. So I think, I think he could have a good run or two, but I'm trying to see like if there's a possibility where he breaks out for like a 40+ yard gain. The Falcons have only allowed 140+ rush this season. Let me look at 20 plus yards. They've allowed 4. So yeah, I could see Jonathan Taylor breaking out for 20+ yard gain or so, maybe 40. And I really should have looked at Jonathan Taylor's over/under on rushing yards, but the reason why I didn't is because the Falcons didn't rank in the top 10 or bottom 10 in rushing yards allowed to running backs this season. But I mean, I think he's a viable option, just pretty much about any game, and I think he could have a solid one here again today. Let's go see if he's ever played against the Falcons real quick. Jonathan Taylor against the Falcons and see how many rushing yards that he picked up. Now, once again, he's been great this season. He had 43 yards and a touchdown. Oh, yeah, in his only career game, 43 rushing yards back in 2023, so a couple of years ago. But, yeah, overall, I can't decide really who has the passing advantage in this one. I would have to lean towards Indianapolis, and then I do give Indianapolis a slight third down conversion advantage, a big red zone conversion advantage, a good-sized red zone attempts per game advantage, and a slight sacks on the quarterback advantage. I do like the Colts to win this game. I think the spread could be a little tricky. I do like the fact that the Colts are better than the Falcons against the spread this season. And I like that the fact that the Colts have won 11 out of their 15 games that they've beat the Falcons in all time were by 7+ points. So bettors. I found that Jonathan Taylor receptions at 2.5 is maybe a good play versus the Falcons. Yeah, we can definitely go look at that. The Falcons, they weren't ranked in the top or bottom 10 in receiving yards allowed to running backs this season. But Jonathan Taylor, over under 2.5 receptions. Let's take a look. He did not go over that in his only career game. So he went over in 0 out of 1 career games against Atlanta in regards to that. And then let's see how many times he's gone over that this season. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 9 games. So 66.66%, 6 out of 9 games this season. He's gone over that. And let's go look at let's go get an idea here. Let's go look at receiving yards allowed by the Colts to running backs, or not the Colts, the Falcons. The Falcons, it looks like they're about average, maybe slightly above average at receiving yards allowed to running backs. So, yeah, I think that could be a decent option there. Indianapolis, let's just go look at target share again. He's received 29 targets this season, which is 5th on the team. Yeah, I can see him getting there. Well, I mean, I just try to think of a concern that I would have, and that would be that the Colts get up big in this game and just opt to run it more, so he has less chances. But the Colts, they're a balanced team in regards to their play calling. They rank 18th in passing play percentage. So out of all of their plays, they call a pretty balanced, a balanced rushing and passing attack. They're not like a run heavy or a pass heavy team with their play calling. Pretty balanced there. So, and Ivan, the Falcons, they're really good at defending against receiving yards to wide receivers, receptions allowed to wide receivers, tight ends. They rank best at limiting receiving yards to tight ends and receptions to tight ends. So I think that is the biggest passing vulnerability in the Atlanta defense is the receiving yards and receptions allowed to running backs in regards to yardage and receptions, right? I think I mentioned earlier, the Falcons are the weakest against running backs receiving touchdowns and wide receivers receiving touchdowns. So even though that the Falcons are good at limiting those wide receiver receiving yards and receptions, they've been allowing a good amount of receiving touchdowns to wide receivers. And, once again, the Falcons are weak at those running backs receiving touchdowns. And, I mentioned that earlier. I think that's an added bonus for Jonathan Taylor to possibly get in the end zone in this game, is the fact that he does have 2 receiving touchdowns this season, one touchdown in 2 separate games. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good look there, Ivan. Thank you for the comment there. But yeah, I got to lean towards the Colts, minus the 6.5. Although, I think it's a somewhat dangerous. Obviously, the lower you take that spread, the better I feel about it. But if I had to lean towards somebody covering here, it'd be the Colts minus 6.5. They're better against the spread than the Falcons, and they won 11 out of 15 of the all-time wins against the Falcons. The Colts have won by 7+ points, and 11 out of 15 all-time wins. Once again, the Colts have a 15-3 career record against the Falcons all-time. Oh, Ivan says he thinks Atlanta wins this one. Yeah, I mean, it starts here pretty soon. I think a lot of people are going to be on the Colts this game, and the Falcons are no walk in the park. We mentioned that they rank first in passing yards allowed per game. So I think, it makes sense if they just hand the ball off to Jonathan Taylor and let him go to work. Once again, the Falcons rank 23rd in rushing yards allowed per game. They're below average in rush yards per attempt allowed. So teams are picking up a good chunk of yardage against them when they are rushing the ball. And Jonathan Taylor ranks first in rushing yards per attempt this season. Another factor here that I didn't mention is Daniel Jones. What's the likelihood of him picking up some quality yardage through the ground here? The Falcons, they look like they're about average, actually a little bit below average in rushing yards allowed to quarterbacks. So, I could see Daniel Jones picking up some yards. Now, I think, for a touchdown is a little difficult here because the Falcons have only allowed one rushing touchdown to quarterbacks this season. And let's just kind of see who they've played. What type of rushing quarterbacks have they played? Looks like Baker Mayfield, Bryce Young. I don't know if Jaden Daniels played in week 4 against them, but I'm about to find out. But that'll give you a pretty good idea, of the likelihood of Daniel Jones possibly sneaking in the end zone here. Jaden Daniels, did he play in that game against the Colts? No. Or against the Falcons? No. He did not. But they played Josh Allen in week 6. Purdy, Drake May. So they've played some decent rushing quarterbacks. And once again, they've only allowed one rushing touchdown to quarterbacks this year. But, I could see Daniel Jones picking up some yards. Once again, this Atlanta pass defense is pretty dang good. So, and they're decent at getting sacks. Atlanta is. They rank 12th in team sacks per game. But Indianapolis has done a good job at protecting Daniel Jones this season. They rank 5th in sacks allowed per game. And Atlanta's done a good job at protecting Penix. So, but yeah, I would say my favorite plays in this one are going to be the Jonathan Taylor anytime touchdown. Once again, I think Josh Downs or Michael Pittman are in a really good situation here to get a touchdown. I can't really decide between the two. Kyle Pitts over the 47.5 receiving yards, I think looks good. Indianapolis is weak defending against those tight end receiving yards. I think Atlanta may be forced to pass the ball in this one. I mean, Robinson over 4.5 receptions doesn't look bad. Jonathan Taylor over the 2.5 receptions looks somewhat solid there. Actually, I think it is solid. And then, Penix. I forgot to touch on him. Over under 233.5 passing yards last that I checked. He's gone over that in 4 out of 7 games this season. Hasn't played against the Colts throughout his career, but the Colts have allowed the 5th most passing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks. And once again, I think that's just where the Colts defense is the most vulnerable is through the air. So I think that's going to be crucial for Atlanta. To have success today is getting it done through the air. But yeah, give me the Colts here, and let's move on to some other games here. Let's break down the weather and injury updates. Okay, I wanted to cover that game before we moved on to the other games, just because it's starting here within the hour. And if you guys have any other questions about that game, feel free to let me know. But yeah, I'm looking at rotogrinders.com, ROTO grinders.com. I'm looking at weather updates for today. So the Saints and Panthers, sustained winds creeping close to 15 miles per hour, gust at 25 miles per hour. Slight downgrade on longer kicks. Maybe a deep pass or two is impacted. Most plays are not impacted, but basically that Saints and Panthers game looks like winds could play a little bit of a factor in that one. And then the Buffalo Miami game, there's a legitimate chance of a downpour in Miami. Um, there's some rain around the area, and there is a chance that it ends up over the stadium, is what they're saying here. So, there could be looks like what they say is a downpour in that Buffalo Miami game. Cleveland and the Jets, some sprinkles or showers, but most of it stays light, is what they're saying. A heavier batch of rain in the game is possible, but it wouldn't be for a significant period of time. So there you have it for the Browns and Jets. Giants at Bears. The winds will be around 20 miles per hour sustained, gusts around 30 miles per hour. Looks like the winds could be problematic for the long throws and kicks. But it doesn't look like it's, it doesn't look like it's going to be very, very impactful. It looks like there will be some impact from those wins, though. New England Patriots at Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Same thing with the Miami game. Both of these games are played in Florida today. There's scattered downpours in that area. It could be get close near the stadium, maybe around the, on top of the stadium. So that has a chance for some rain there as well. Detroit at Washington. The worst of the rain holds off until after the game, but there's still a chance for some showers here, is what they're saying. And then Philadelphia at Packers. Is that game? When is that game? Is that in the afternoon? I felt like that was a night game. Tomorrow night. So we'll cover that tomorrow. And then let's go through some injury updates here. Okay. Jaden Daniels, quarterback for the Washington Commanders, out with an elbow issue. So Mariota will most likely start today for Washington. Bucky Irving, running back for Tampa Bay, out once again with a foot issue. Garrett Wilson, wide receiver for the New York Jets, is questionable, but is expected to play, is what they're saying here on the FanDuel Daily Fantasy app, which it looks like the FanDuel Daily Fantasy app and RotoWire.com have identical injury updates, so they probably have some sort of a partnership. So, but yeah, Wilson, questionable, but is expected to play today for that New York Jets team. Kyler Murray, he's on the IR. So, Brissett will remain. Looks like, will most likely remain that starting quarterback for Arizona. DeAndre Swift, questionable, but is expected to play today against the Giants. Now, what I'm seeing here in the notes is that, the coach Ben Johnson said that they may be using Monangai a little bit more than Swift, since Monangai has the hot hand right now. So, but I do expect them to, still split some carries, but I don't know what the splits are going to be. I don't know if it's going to be 50-50, 60-40, but it looks like they're liking what they see out of Monangai. Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver for Jacksonville, out. Brock Purdy, questionable with a toe issue, but regardless of him being available or not, looks like Mac Jones will draw that start today for the San Francisco 49ers. CJ Stroud, quarterback for the Houston Texans, is out. And their projected starting quarterback today is Davis Mills. This is what I'm seeing. Davis Mills. Okay. Ted McMillan, wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers, hamstring issue, is expected to play today for the Panthers. Aaron Jones Sr., questionable with a shoulder issue, but is expected to play today. Running back for the Minnesota Vikings, Aaron Jones Sr. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver for Washington, out today with a quadriceps issue. Alvin Kamara, ankle issue, questionable for the game today against Carolina. Let's see, any other? Ramondre Stevenson, running back for the New England Patriots, is out with a toe issue. Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver for San Francisco, remains out. A.J. Barner, tight end for Seattle, is listed as questionable, but is expected to play. Booty, wide receiver for the New England Patriots, hamstring, out today. Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver for Washington. They've had a lot of injuries to their wide receivers, or just inactive wide receivers this season. But yeah, he's been placed on the IR, so he'll be out today. Luke McCaffrey. Cooper Kupp, wide receiver for Seattle, hamstring issue, is expected to play today. Chris Godwin, wide receiver for Tampa Bay, out with a lower leg issue today. Harold Fannin Jr., tight end for Cleveland, has a hamstring issue, but is expected to play today. Jordan Whittington, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams, has a back issue and is listed as questionable. Typically, when players are questionable, there's about a 50-50 chance. If they're probable, then they're most likely going to play. If they're doubtful, then the chances of them playing are usually pretty slim. Josh Palmer, wide receiver for Buffalo, questionable with a knee/ankle issue. Torrey Horton, wide receiver for Seattle, doubtful in this game today. I mean, he had 2 receiving touchdowns last game for Seattle. Isaiah Bond, wide receiver for Cleveland, out with a foot issue today. D. Eskridge, wide receiver for Miami, out, shoulder issue. Josh Reynolds, still on the IR for the Jets, wide receiver. Ollie Gordon, questionable for Miami today with an ankle issue. Noah Brown, another Washington wide receiver, is out today. He's on the IR with an issue. Tutu Atwell on the IR, wide receiver for the Rams there. So just going to scroll down and see if we have any other big-time injuries. Really doesn't look like it. So there you have it for the injury updates. And I'll check periodically throughout the show or near the time that I'm done, and we'll cover and see if anything else shows up, okay? So let's start with, let's see, what game do you guys want to talk about? I want to talk about this Buffalo and Miami game. So, excuse me. Buffalo has won 7 games in a row against Miami. Buffalo has won the last 14 out of 15 games against Miami. Josh Allen has a 14-2 career record against the Dolphins, which does include the playoffs. Tua, the quarterback for Miami, has a 1-9 record against the Bills, which includes the playoffs. And I do think Buffalo is one of the better teams today to score multiple touchdowns. Miami is vulnerable specifically to quarterbacks rushing touchdowns and tight end receiving touchdowns. So let's go look at Josh Allen real quick, rushing props. First off, Miami as a team allows the third most rushing yards per game to opposing teams. Okay. Also, Miami allows the fifth most rushing yards per attempt. So when teams are running the ball against Miami, they're picking up a good amount of yards. Josh Allen ranks seventh best in the entire NFL in rushing yards per attempt. So he's picking up some good yardage when he is running the ball against a team that's allowing a good chunk of yardage when teams are rushing against them. Last that I checked, well, let me touch upon this real quick. Miami has allowed the eighth most rushing yards to quarterbacks this season. Also, Miami has allowed the second most rushing touchdowns to quarterbacks this season. Last that I checked, Josh Allen over under 27.5 rushing yards. He's gone over that in 5 out of 8 games this season. So that's more times than not. He's gone over the 27.5 rushing yards. He's gone over that line in over half of his career games against Miami. In 9 out of 16 career games against Miami, he's gone over that line. But he's only scored a rushing touchdown in 4 out of 16 career games against Miami. So 25% of his games against Miami, he's had a rushing touchdown. And then, I have in my notes here that for some reason, I like Josh Allen to go over this rushing line more than James Cook. Although, obviously, I think they're both in good situations here. James Cook, he's gone over his 85.5 rushing yard line in 75% of his games this season. 6 out of 8 of his games, he's gone over 85.5 rushing yards. And Miami has allowed the third most rushing yards to running backs this season. James Cook also ranks second best in the NFL. We mentioned Jonathan Taylor is the best at yards per carry. Jonathan Taylor, well, James Cook is ranked second best in the NFL in yards per carry. But my concern is that James Cook has only gone over the 85.5 rushing yards in 1 out of 8 career games against Miami. But he has scored a touchdown in 5 out of 8 career games against Miami. So maybe I'm thinking Josh Allen has a better chance for going over those rushing yards, and then James Cook maybe has a better chance of getting into the end zone. Let me see how many rushing touchdowns Miami has allowed to running backs. They're about average, middle of the pack. And then something else that we can do. So the reason why I was thinking about these guys scoring touchdowns is because Buffalo is good at getting into the red zone, and they're good at converting touchdowns when they get into the red zone. They really have an advantage to get into the red zone. They rank 6th best in the NFL in red zone attempts per game, and Miami is allowing their opponents to get into the red zone often. They rank 29th in red zone attempts per game. And then, Buffalo's pretty good at converting touchdowns. They rank 9th best in the NFL when they do get into the red zone to convert touchdowns. But Miami's red zone defense is no slouch. They rank 10th in opponent red zone conversion rate. But, still, I think Buffalo will see a lot of opportunity today to get into the red zone. And we also talked about how there's a chance of a downpour in this game. So I think with that being said, these quarterbacks, they're professional quarterbacks. They can throw in bad conditions, especially, a guy like Josh Allen. But I do, just in case there is a lot of rain, I think there could be a lot of rain, or whoever rushes the ball the best may come out on top of this game, right? But James Cook, I like his history against Miami in getting in the end zone, but I don't like his history when it comes to getting over those rushing yards. But I think, those guys could have big games today. Josh Allen, James Cook. And then I also mentioned that Miami's vulnerable to tight end scoring touchdowns, right? Miami has allowed the third most receiving yards to tight ends this season and the third most receptions to tight ends this season. So that really makes me look at Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. And if I were to have to go with so I got some interesting statistics with these guys. Okay. So let's start with Kincaid. He's gone over the 43.5 receiving line in 4 out of 7 games this season. So more than half of his games, he's gone over that 43.5. But he's only gone over that in 2 out of 5 career games against Miami, and he's only scored a touchdown in 1 out of 5 career games against Miami. But he has averaged more yards per catch at home than the road in every season that he's had, and this is his 3rd season. So, Dalton Kincaid, this game is in Miami. He's more of a home guy in regards to the yards per catch. So, I think his receptions is probably the way I'm leaning towards, over the 3.5 receptions instead of the receiving yards for him, simply because he's averaged more yards per catch at home than the road. So the receptions are at 3.5. He's gone over that in 5 out of 7 games this season, and he's gone over that in all 5 career games against Miami. So that looks pretty solid. Once again, Miami has allowed the 3rd most receptions to tight ends. Now, let's touch up on Dawson Knox here for a second. Over under 10.5 receiving yards. He's gone over that in 6 out of 7 games this season. He's gone over that line in 10 out of 11 career games against Miami, in which he was targeted. There was 2 games where he wasn't targeted, and I didn't count that against him. But yeah, 10 out of 11 career games in which he was targeted, he's gone over the 10.5 receiving line against Miami. He's had a touchdown in 5 out of 11 career games against Miami. And Dawson Knox has averaged more yards per catch on the road than at home in 5 out of 7 career seasons that he's had. So he's really the guy, who's picking up yards per catch on the road, whereas Kincaid is picking up those yards per catch when they're at home. So I like Dawson Knox going over 10.5 receiving yards today. And then, the receptions, I think, is a viable option as well. He just doesn't have as good of current and past history against Miami when it comes to getting over that 1.5 receptions. So, maybe he catches like a 15-yard touchdown pass or something like that, Dawson Knox over 1.5 receptions. Like I said, he's gone over that in 3 out of 7 games this season, 8 out of 11 career games against Miami and in the games that he was targeted. And then once again, 5 out of 11 career games against Miami. He has scored a touchdown. I wonder what his odds to get one today are. Let me just go look, and then I'll get to your guys' comments here in just a moment. Dawson Knox plus 425. I mean, doesn't sound terrible. Once again, Miami has allowed a lot of touchdowns to tight ends, the second most. They're tied with some teams, but they have allowed the second most. And then, we could go look at I want to look at a couple other things for you guys here. Dawson red zone targets is what I wanted to look up. Receiving targets for Buffalo. Because we know, Dawson Knox has good history against Miami. But how many red zone targets is he seeing this year? Kincaid has seen 3 red zone targets. Knox has seen 2. And, Josh Allen can really spread that ball anywhere. But, I mean, that just lets you know that Kincaid anytime touchdown, based on all of this data, isn't as valuable, as a Dawson Knox anytime touchdown. And just by analyzing the data. And then there's some other things that I want to touch up on, and then I'll get to your comments. So I did notice that Miami has allowed the most 20-plus rushing yard gains this season. We already said that, James Cook and Josh Allen are great at rushing yards per attempt. So there's just another reason, another added benefit there. And the Dolphins have allowed the second most 40-plus rushing yard offensive plays by opposing teams. They've allowed 4 40-plus rushing yards, rushing plays. So I think there is a decent chance that Josh Allen and James Cook both have big runs in this game. And then we'll talk about the Miami offense here in just a second. Let's get to that. Let me read some of these comments here. Dolphins team total over 20.5. Dolphins have hit this twice out of 3 games, says Ivan. And Bills have allowed over 20.5 in 3 out of the last 4 games to opponents. And, of course, give me Tua over the 2.5 rushing yards. Yeah, I know that you like that prop, Ivan. And, Buffalo has allowed the 3rd most rushing yards to quarterbacks this season. So, I think Tua could go over that. I'm not going to look at how many times Tua has gone over that unless I can, easily find it here. But yeah, I think he's in a good spot today. I'm not going to look that up, but what I would do if I was thinking about playing Tua over the 2.5 rushing yards is seeing how many times he's gone over that in career games against Buffalo. And then let's see. Ivan says, give me the Dolphins to cover the line. Makes 0 sense at 9.5. Why isn't it 10.5 or higher? Smells a lot like the past game. Yeah. Dolphins players need to be investigated for gambling. They throwing games, says Feast Mode. Dolphins have scored over 20 points at home in 8 out of 10 games at home. That's great information. Thank you guys for letting everybody know. It's nice to have other people talk about statistics in the comments, but if you're just hanging out, I appreciate you guys too. So, okay, so let's talk about James Cook receiving yards real quick. Okay, I did have that on my sheet here, and then we'll talk about Miami. But yeah, James Cook over under 8.5 receiving yards. Miami has allowed the 6th most receiving yards to running backs this season, the 6th most receptions to running backs this season. But Miami's pass defense just isn't as vulnerable as their rush defense, right? But, I did find that the running back receptions and receiving yards to be a weak point in the Miami defense. James Cook has gone over the 8.5 receiving yards in half of his games this season. He's gone over that in 75% of his career games against Miami. So 6 out of 8 career games against Miami, he's gone over that line. He's also scored a touchdown in 5 out of 8 career games against Miami. I think I mentioned that earlier. But James Cook has averaged more yards per catch on grass, which this game is being played on grass. He's averaged more yards per catch on grass than turf in every season that he's ever played in, and this is his 4th season in the NFL. So I think that looks pretty solid. And then James Cook over under 1.5 receptions. He's gone over that in 3 out of 8 games this season, so not as good as the receiving yards, but he has gone over that in 5 out of 8 career games against Miami as well. But, he's got better history. He's got better current history and history against Miami going over the receiving yards. And then once again, he's averaged more yards per catch on grass than turf in every season that he's played in. This is his 4th season in the NFL. Now let's talk about Miami for a little bit here in their offense. Let's see what I got down here. You know, Buffalo is a very good pass defense. They're much like Atlanta. Atlanta ranks first in passing yards allowed per game. Buffalo ranks second. And where Buffalo's really vulnerable at is that rush defense, you know. Now Miami could have been better at rushing the ball this year, but if we go back to that game, Buffalo and Miami earlier this year, Achane picked up 62 rushing yards off 12 carries. I think he'll need to, do a little bit better of a job exposing this Bills rush defense today for the Dolphins to have a chance. But needless to say, Buffalo has allowed the ninth most rushing yards to running backs this season. Achane, last that I checked, over under 65.5 rushing yards. He's gone over that in 5 out of 9 games this season. He's gone over that in 2 out of 5 career games against Buffalo. But he has a touchdown in 4 out of 5 career games against Buffalo. And he's had 2+ touchdowns in 2 out of 5 career games against Buffalo. So if you're thinking for a multiple touchdown scorer today, this is somebody to consider. And I do like the fact that he has a touchdown in 4 out of 5 career games against Buffalo. But I got a couple of questions here. How many rushing touchdowns is Buffalo allowing to running backs this season? They've allowed the second most, according to fantasy.nfl.com. They've allowed the second most rushing touchdowns to running backs this season. Buffalo has not allowed a receiving touchdown to a running back this season. And that's where Achane, that's one of his strengths is receiving. So I feel like there's a better chance for him to get it done on the ground than through the air, simply because Buffalo is way more vulnerable to running backs rushing touchdowns than receiving touchdowns. But also, I just want to mention that Achane ranks 11th best in the entire NFL in yards per carry. And Buffalo allows the second most yards per rush attempt when teams are running the ball against them. So I think there is a possibility Achane can break out for some significant gains in this one. How significant? Let's look to see how many times the Bills have allowed 20+ rushing yards to opposing teams. They've allowed 8 20+ yard rushing gains to opposing teams. So, much like the Dolphins, they've been allowing some big gains. And then they've allowed, by the way, that ranks 4th worst in the NFL. And how many times a team has allowed 20+ rushing gains. And then, they've allowed 3 40+ rushing gains. And Miami, let's see if they've been, they've had 6 20+ rushing gains, which is pretty good. And then 40+ rushing gains, they've had 2. So there's basically, all in all, what I'm saying is that looks like there's a bigger chance in this game than any other game for there to be some long runs, whether it be Achane, Cook, Allen, 2 of them, all of them. Achane receiving yards, maybe rushing and receiving, says Ivan. Yeah, when I think about Achane, the first thing that I think about is the receiving. And here's the thing, though. We mentioned that Buffalo ranks 2nd best in passing yards allowed per game. To that running back position, they rank 2nd best in receiving yards allowed to running backs, and they rank 3rd best in limiting receptions to running backs. So from that standpoint, I'm concerned, but it all depends on the line, right? Just because a team is really good at defending against a position doesn't mean that the line, won't be somewhat appealing here. Achane over under 30.5 receiving yards. Did he go over that in his only game against Buffalo this season? He had 29. and with the rain coming in today, does it make that for a better chance to hit? Will Tua be looking for that a little bit more? I don't know. But I'm just a little skeptical about it, just because of how good Buffalo has been defending against that this season. But yeah, man, I think my favorite touchdown scorer in this game is going to be James Cook. I think Dawson Knox. I already talked about his receiving yards and a potential anytime touchdown looks solid here. And then Josh Allen over the 27.5 rushing yards, and I already mentioned James Cook, anytime touchdowns. I do feel like this is one of the better spots today for Buffalo to score. Now, if there is a downpour, which it seems like that's a big possibility, I'll still trust the Bills to weather the storm. And I mentioned that Buffalo's won 7 games in a row against Miami. I was thinking about, I'm not sure if I used Buffalo or not in my Survivor this season, this year. We're in week 10. I don't know if I used them or not. I was thinking about using them, but if you guys have like Survivor picks or something, or thinking about taking Buffalo on the money line, I think that's a viable option, simply because Buffalo's won 7 in a row against Miami, 14 out of the last 15 games against Miami. Josh Allen's has very good history against the Dolphins, and Tua has very bad history against the Bills. So now against the spread, the Bills are 4-4, and Miami's 4-5. Spread, yeah, I'll just have to lean towards Buffalo getting the job done there. And let's move on to another game here, unless you guys had any other questions. Here is it's Miami bettors. It rains every day for at least 15 to 20 minutes. Right on, man. Yeah. So let's see what other big time games that I was thinking about here that start in the earlier section. Let's talk about Baltimore at Minnesota. By the way, if you guys scan that QR code at the top left corner, it'll take you all of those sweet deals we have at the Not Move podcast. Walmart.com, Open Goal, MLB and NFL Pro Shops, jerseys, all that stuff. But anyways, let's get to it here. Baltimore at Minnesota. Now, Baltimore leads the all-time series 4-3 against Minnesota. The home team out of this matchup today, Minnesota's the home team. The home team has won 6 games in a row between these two teams. This game is being played on turf. Lamar Jackson has a 1-0 career record against Minnesota. I have in my notes here that DeAndre Hopkins needs 6 receptions. What was his over/under on receptions last time I checked? Let me just go look. But he needs 6 receptions. Okay, Hopkins does. To reach 1,000 career receptions. So if you were thinking about Hopkins' receptions today, you have that added benefit that he trying to find the game here. You have the added benefit that he is playing to hit a milestone. Now, over under receptions for him. Just a second. Sorry, guys. I was just having trouble finding a reception line for him. I don't see a receptions line for Hopkins, but if you do, you have that added benefit that he needs 6 more receptions to reach 1,000 career receptions, and then he needs 7 receptions to pass Hines Ward on the career receptions leaders list. Hopkins also needs 42 receiving yards to move into 18th place on the all-time receiving yards leaders list. Hopkins needs 1 receiving touchdown to move into 19th place on the all-time receiving touchdowns leaders list. He would pass Hines Ward and Lance Allworth. So there's a lot at stake today for Hopkins. Now, he can hit these milestones in some other games, right? But if you like him today, you have those added benefits. And the line in this game is, I'm seeing Baltimore by minus 3.5. Minnesota is better against the spread this season than Baltimore. Minnesota's 4-4 against the spread. Baltimore's 3-5 against the spread. Also, we talked about how the home team has won the last 6 games in a row between these teams. Seeing that Minnesota has a pretty good passing advantage. And I think, the numbers could be skewed a little bit. I want to look real quick at passing yards per game in the NFL last season. And I think that'll give us a better idea of where Baltimore stands. I mean, they ranked 7th best in the NFL last season in passing yards per game. And I know Lamar Jackson's missed a lot of time this season. So I feel like that number is skewed. I'm seeing that Baltimore currently ranks 28th in passing yards per game. But I think with Lamar back, that could be a different story. But all in all, Minnesota's pass defense is much, much better than Baltimore's pass defense in regards to yards allowed per game. So I think it's pretty even. But, overall, I guess I'm going to give Minnesota a slight passing advantage, really just because of Baltimore's pass defense weakness. But let's talk about, Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson. So, I talked about how Baltimore has a weak pass defense. Baltimore has allowed the 5th most passing yards per game to opposing teams this season, and they've allowed the 10th most receiving yards to wide receivers. Minnesota also calls a high percentage of passing plays. They rank 8th in passing play percentage. So they're calling a high percentage of passing plays relative to the other teams in the league. Last that I checked, Justin Jefferson over under 73.5 receiving yards. He's gone over that in 75% of his games this season, so 6 out of 8 games. But he did not go over that in his only career game against Baltimore, but he did score a touchdown in that game. So if you're thinking about Justin Jefferson, anytime touchdown, you got that working for you. Now, Baltimore also has allowed the 5th most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this season. But let's get back to Justin Jefferson receiving yards. At the start of this breakdown, I mentioned that this game is being played on turf. Well, Justin Jefferson has averaged more yards per catch on turf than grass in every season except this season, and this is his 6th season. So I feel like this is a game where he can accumulate some receiving yards to continue that trend of averaging more yards per catch on turf than grass in every season that he's played in. Well, he hasn't played a full season yet. He's also averaged more yards per catch in every season at home than on the road, except for one season. So the fact that he's on turf and at home, statistically, historically, his receiving yards per catch have gone up at least. And then he's scored many more touchdowns. I have on my notes here. He has scored many more touchdowns on turf than grass in every season he's played in, except it's tied this season. That looks solid. Justin Jefferson over receiving yards, Justin Jefferson anytime touchdown, I think are both, that looks good. Also, going back to DeAndre Hopkins real quick. I know he's with Baltimore. And I mentioned that Minnesota has a good pass defense. But Hopkins is playing with some extra potential benefits today. And with those milestones I was talking about he could hit. Well, he has scored exactly one touchdown in all 3 games that he's ever played against Minnesota. Now, Minnesota receiving touchdowns allowed to wide receivers, they've allowed 8, so they're actually a little below average in allowing receiving touchdowns to wide receivers, although they've done great at limiting those receiving yards and receptions. So I think DeAndre Hopkins could possibly get a touchdown here. Once again, he needs one more receiving touchdown to move into 19th place on the all-time receiving touchdowns leaders list. But back to Justin Jefferson real quick. I think another added benefit of him going over the receiving yards is the fact that Baltimore is allowing a decent chunk of yardage when teams are passing the ball against them. They rank 19th in opponent yards per completion, and Justin Jefferson ranks 2nd best on the Vikings and 28th best in the NFL in yards per catch this season. Somebody else that could benefit from that is Jordan Addison, I'm thinking. Now, he's gone over the 47.5 receiving line in 3 out of 5 games this season, but he's never played against Baltimore. And then even Jalen Naylor, he's gone over the 20.5 receiving yards in 5 out of 8 games this season, but he's also never played against Baltimore. I think like the worst prop I see between Addison, Naylor, and Jefferson receiving yards and receptions is going to be Justin Jefferson over 6.5 receptions, just because he did not go over that in his only career game against Baltimore, and he's only gone over that in 3 out of 8 games this season, whereas the receiving yards, he has much better current history and we talked about those yards per catch on turf and grass and home versus away and all that stuff. And sorry, guys, I'm zoned into these statistics, thinking about, I'm wanting to give you guys this information. So it's tough for me to look at the comments, but I'm glad that you guys are commenting. Let's see if we can address some of these. Mark Andrews receiving and receptions. I'm not going to cover every single player prop, but what I will do is say that Minnesota, although they are good at defending against the receiving yards to wide receivers and receiving yards allowed to running backs, this seems like their biggest passing vulnerability, Ivan, is the receiving yards allowed to tight ends and receptions allowed to tight ends. Because in my notes here, I do not have them ranked in the top 10 or bottom 10 in receiving yards or receptions allowed to tight ends. So they're somewhere in the middle there, whereas they rank really good at defending against receiving yards and receptions to running backs and wide receivers. So I think just based on that alone, that's a good look there, Ivan. JJ at 5.5 receptions. See, I saw it at 6.5 when I looked yesterday. And he'd only gone over that in 3 out of 8 games. Maybe he has better history of going over 5.5. I think that's definitely something worth looking into now that it's dropped to 5.5. I also like Zay Flowers, says Ivan. I also like Zay Flowers since it's not a primetime game. Vikings can't defend the rush, is what Ivan's saying. Yeah. So both of these teams have actually been weak against the run this season. Minnesota ranks 20th in rushing yards allowed per game, so they're below average in that category. Baltimore ranks 21st, so they're neck and neck in that category. But Baltimore has just done a better job at running the ball this season. Let's get to some of these other comments real quick. I love Aaron Jones for 15.5 receiving yards, or both rushing and receiving, says Ivan. Should I bet on Sam Darnold this week, says Feast Mode. Yeah, we can go talk about that game here and let's go cover that game after this one, Feast Mode. Hey, just looking to say what's up. Vikes for life. Right on, Buds, man. Hey, we appreciate you stopping in and saying what's up, man. Glad you could make it. Thank you for the comment. Good luck today, everybody. But yeah, let's keep breaking down these games a little bit here. So I did not look. It's, there's so many different player props and whatnot, right? So I can't look into everything. I simply don't have the time. And the reason why I didn't look into Lamar Jackson or Derrick Henry rushing yards is because Minnesota hasn't been extremely vulnerable to rushing yards allowed to quarterbacks or running backs. All right. Even though their rush defense is below average in regards to yards allowed per game. But I did see that, Derrick Henry has scored a touchdown in 1 out of 2 career games against Minnesota. And he actually had 2 touchdowns in that game. So there's another guy who has a game against a team that he's playing today with 2+ touchdowns. And then Lamar Jackson did not score a rushing touchdown in his only career game against Minnesota. I think another added benefit with Derrick Henry, if you're thinking about taking him for rushing yards today, is the fact that Minnesota ranked 16th. So they are average. So they're not great or terrible at limiting yards per carry. And Derrick Henry ranks 13th best in the NFL in yards per rush attempt. So, let's talk about just some general statistics real quick. Baltimore ranks 10th worst in passing yards allowed to quarterbacks. So last I saw, McCarthy over under 209.5 passing yards. He hasn't gone over that this season, though. Baltimore has allowed the 9th most receiving yards to running backs. So if you're thinking about a Minnesota Viking getting receiving yards today, that is an added benefit. And I did see that Ivan said something about Zay Flowers, about how he liked Zay Flowers today. Let's bring up that comment. Well, I didn't look specifically into Zay Flowers' prop because Minnesota has done such a good job at limiting receiving yards and receptions to wide receivers. But I think that Zay Flowers has a good possibility, and same with Bateman, to pick up a decent chunk of yardage when they do catch the ball, simply because Minnesota is allowing a good chunk of yardage per completion. And Bateman ranks 48th best in the NFL in yards per catch, and Zay Flowers ranks 52nd. But something that I want to think of is receiving defense by Minnesota. How many times has Minnesota allowed a 20+ reception, a 20+ yard reception? They've allowed the 3rd fewest. And then 40+, they've allowed the 3rd most. So, who's picking up the 40+ yard receptions between Bateman and Zay Flowers? So what I'll do to figure that out is go over here to rotowire.com, and I'm going to click on Bateman and Flowers, okay? Right click on their names here. I think RotoWire is pretty easy to navigate through in regards to at least seeing who's the better of the two at getting 40+ yard gains. Bateman doesn't have one this season. And Zay Flowers at least has one, So I'd have to lean towards Zay Flowers having the better game out of the two. So I'm with you there, Ivan. I also like the fact that you mentioned Zay Flowers, but I'm not going to necessarily look into that prop. But let's get into who I'm thinking about for this game, and then move on to that Seattle-Arizona game. If there's any questions that you guys have or any game that you want me to cover specifically, feel free to let me know. So Minnesota's better against the spread. Like I said, the home team has won the last 6 games between these two teams. They've played a total of 7 total games throughout history against each other. So the home team has won 6 out of 7 of those games. I do give Baltimore a big rushing advantage. And I don't know who to give the passing advantage to, but I give Baltimore a big rushing advantage. And I do give Baltimore a slight 3rd down conversion advantage. Minnesota, I give a slight red zone conversion advantage in regards to scoring touchdowns, but that could be skewed as well. I mean, I'm pretty sure the Baltimore Ravens, let's go look real quick. Red zone conversion rate in the NFL. I mean, last season, I think they were the best team at converting touchdowns when they entered the red zone. They were. So the fact that they have Lamar Jackson back today makes me believe that number is skewed. Minnesota slight red zone attempts per game advantage, but that could be skewed. Um, Minnesota a good sacks on the quarterback advantage, but that could be skewed. I'm going to go against the grain here. I got to go with Baltimore here, simply because they got Lamar Jackson back. I know that the home team has won the past 6 games in a row, so that's a dangerous trend to go up against. Personally, this is a stay away spot for me, but I'm going to have to lean towards Baltimore with that cover there. What is it? Baltimore minus 3.5. I think they get it done on the ground today. So, okay, so yeah, let's go look at boy. Let me scroll down here to the Seattle and Arizona game. All right. Because somebody said, should I take Sam Darnold this week? Seahawks have won the last 9 out of 10 games against Arizona. Seattle's won 8 games in a row against Arizona. These teams played each other on this exact date, so November 9th in 2017, and Seattle won that game 22-16. I have on my notes here that Seattle is a team that has a good chance of scoring a lot of touchdowns today. Seems like Arizona's most vulnerable to rushing touchdowns allowed to running backs. Charbonnet has the most attempts on this team within the 5-yard line and the 20-yard line this season. He scored a touchdown in 2 out of 4 career games against Arizona. One of those games, he had 2 touchdowns. Kenneth Walker is worth consideration, but he's only scored in 2 out of 6 career games against Arizona. But he did have a multiple touchdown game in that one, in one of those games as well, 2+ touchdowns. Seattle is 6-2 against the spread. Arizona is 5-3 against the spread. So in that respect, Seattle has an advantage there. Kyler Murray, once again, he's expected to be out, and then Jacoby Brissett is projected to start. I have Seattle having a big passing advantage in this game, a slight rushing advantage, good red zone conversion advantage. I think they have a good chance of getting into the red zone often in this one, and a big sacks on the quarterback advantage. The only real advantage I see for Arizona here is maybe a slight red zone attempts per game advantage. And they do have a pretty big 3rd down conversion advantage. That's something that Seattle hasn't been great at this season. They rank 22nd in 3rd down conversion rate. Arizona has been good at defending against the 3rd down, and Arizona has been good at converting on 3rd down situations, although Seattle hasn't been extremely vulnerable to that. So based on all of that, yeah, I gotta lean towards Seattle covering in this one, and let's look at maybe some props for this one. Arizona ranks 23rd in passing yards allowed per game, 12th in rushing yards allowed per game. So really, they're a little bit more vulnerable to the pass than the rush. And I think something that's impressive with Seattle this season. Hold up, guys. It's hot in here. Let me get this fan going. One moment. I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that, guys. It was extremely hot. Okay, so let's look at some player props here. Seattle. Let's talk about the receivers here for Seattle. I mentioned that's where Arizona is weak. Oh, what I was saying is something that's very impressive with Seattle this season is that they have called the second most rushing plays out of all the teams in the league, percentage wise. Now, there may be a team that has called more rushing plays or whatever, but out of the play calls that they have had, they call the second highest percentage of rushing plays. But when you look at passing yards per game in the NFL, they rank fourth best. So they must be getting some big gains whenever they are passing the ball. And yes, they rank first in the NFL in plays in passing plays that are 40 plus or more yards. They've had 7. And Arizona, let's go see if they're allowing some big plays. Arizona's actually done a pretty good job at limiting the 40-plus yard plays. The 20-plus yard plays, they've done a pretty good job at limiting that as well. Arizona's also good at limiting the yards per completion. So what that's kind of telling me is that teams are kind of just picking Arizona apart a little bit instead of getting huge gains against them. So maybe more of a guy who's a possession receiver here for Seattle might be the way to go instead of that home run hitter. But I do have Arizona ranked 10th worst in receptions allowed to wide receivers this year. So that made me look into the JSN over 6.5 receptions a little bit. JSN's gone over that. Jackson Smith Jigba has gone over that in 6 out of 8 games this season. But my concern is that he's never gone over that line in a game against Arizona. 0 out of 5 career games. JSN has had 7+ receptions against Arizona. But he has scored a touchdown in 3 out of 5 career games against Arizona. And when we look at receiving touchdowns allowed by Arizona to the wide receiver position, they've allowed the second fewest. So, I mean, I like the history there for JSN. Arizona, their pass defense is weird because they allow a lot of passing yards, but they're not allowing a lot of like big gains or receptions to wide receiver or touchdowns to wide receivers, I should say. Rashid Shaheed, last that I checked, this guy's over under his 2.5 receptions. He's gone over that in every single game this year. 9 out of 9. If that line is still at 2.5, he's gone over that in every game this year. Now, he's with the new team now, but it's hard not to like that. Is this his first game with Seattle? I mean, obviously, if it is, there could be some chemistry issues there and whatnot. But yeah, this is his first game with them. So let's see if he can keep that trend up, going over the 2.5 receptions. Once again, 9 out of 9 this season. He's also gone over that in 1 out of 2 career games against Arizona, and he has scored a touchdown in 1 out of 2 career games against Arizona. And then Cooper Kupp, we mentioned that he's questionable with a hamstring issue, but he is expected to play. I didn't look into his receptions because they didn't have it listed at the time I was doing my research, but he has scored a touchdown in 7 out of 16 career games against Arizona. Once again, I'm a little skeptical about the wide receivers scoring touchdowns today. I think, the guy I really got to look for is Charbonnet and maybe a little bit of Kenneth Walker here to score touchdowns. But, A.J. Barner, I got him listed here, the tight end for Seattle. Arizona has allowed the 8th most receiving yards to tight ends. They've allowed the 7th most receptions to tight ends. A.J. Barner has gone over the 26.5 receiving mark in only 3 out of 8 games this season and only 1 out of 3 games against Arizona. But he has scored a touchdown against Arizona in 1 out of 3 of those career games against them. And when we look at receiving touchdowns allowed by Arizona, they've allowed 3 to tight ends this season, which is probably slightly above average. Once again, Arizona, it seems like they're really most vulnerable to the running back position, scoring touchdowns. What about quarterback for some reason? They've only allowed 1 rushing touchdown to a quarterback. So I'm thinking maybe, this could be I do have Seattle in my notes as one of the better teams to score touchdowns in this one, but I'm going to have to lean towards those Seattle running backs. And then let's talk about, I didn't look into too many Arizona Cardinal props, but one guy I got on my list is Trey McBride, right? Seattle, they do rank 18th in passing yards allowed per game. And then rushing yards allowed per game, they rank 2nd. So they are much more vulnerable to the pass than the rush. They're very good at defending against the rushing attack in regards to yardage allowed. They're not allowing, they rank 1st in opponent rush yards per attempt. So teams are not getting huge gains off of Seattle whenever they are running the ball. And, Trey McBride is somebody that I got on my list here. Let's look into it. So Trey McBride has gone over the 64.5 receiving yard line in 3 out of 8 games this season. He's gone over that in 2 out of 5 career games against Seattle, but there were 2 games that he may have played in, but he wasn't targeted in those games. But yeah, 2 out of 5 career games against Seattle. He's only scored a touchdown in 1 out of 5 career games against Seattle. And he has averaged more yards per catch on turf than grass in 3 out of 4 seasons. This game is being played on turf. So if you are thinking about Trey McBride, I'm a little skeptical about it, but I think Arizona's got to do something, and that's probably their best chance, Pretty sure that Trey McBride leads this team in target share. Yeah, he does. And, he's the 2nd leader in the NFL in red zone targets this season. And, if Arizona gets into the red zone, I think they do have a chance to get a touchdown here with McBride. Seattle's done a pretty good job at defending against teams just scoring when they do enter the red zone against them. But Arizona, they're actually getting into the red zone quite often, and I think there will be some opportunity for Trey McBride to get a touchdown. But once again, he's only scored a touchdown in 1 out of 5 career games. But it's hard to neglect the fact that he's the 2nd leader in the entire NFL in red zone targets this season. So, and then Seattle, how many touchdowns have they allowed to that tight end position this year? They've allowed 3, so a little above average in that regard. But I think that's got to be, Arizona's probably their best chance to score. Receiving touchdowns allowed by Seattle to running backs. I just got to look this up real quick. They've allowed 2 wide receiver touchdowns. Seattle's done a good job at preventing wide receiver touchdowns. Quarterback rushing touchdowns. They just, their defense is solid. So I think Trey McBride's got to be the best look there. I don't really like it though, to be honest with you. So yeah, give me Seattle in this one to cover that -7 and Charbonnet anytime touchdown, potentially 2+ touchdowns. And I think Kenneth Walker is also worth consideration. Um, but if you're thinking about money line, Seattle once again they've won the last 9 out of 10 games against Arizona. They've won 8 in a row against Arizona. Um, but if you want to be a contrarian and go against the grain, I mean, Arizona would be the pick here. I got to lean towards Seattle minus that 7 though. All right, let's move on to another game here. All right, it's time to talk about it. Bear down. I got the Bears in my Survivor this week. I've made it. This is week 10, and here we are. Today's the day. Honestly, the Survivor pick, I mean, that's just, it's hard to have that not just in the back of your head every day, since what was it? Since last week, who did I have? It was team on like Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football. I had Seattle last week, and they dominated whoever they played. But like since then, I can't lie, this Survivor pick has just been in the back of my head, and I'm glad today's the day. And if it loses, it loses. But here we are, man. Giants at Chicago. The home team has won the last 8 meetings between these two teams. The Bears are at home today. The Bears do have a better record against the spread than the Giants. When I made that selection for my Survivor pick, which is just money line. It's not the spread, although I do feel comfortable with the spread with the Bears. But one of the reasons why I posted that pick so early is not just because of confidence, but just in case there were people out there that wanted to tail. Once again, if you are tailing, please do so at your own risk, and please be responsible and all that stuff. But the Bears were minus 3.5 at that time. And I wanted to get people that opportunity to get a decent price on that money line, and in case that line jumped up, which it did, now it's at minus 4.5. Yeah, sure, I still have to lean towards the Bears minus that 4.5, but I'm hoping that they win today. Now, I mentioned that DeAndre Swift was questionable, but he is expected to play. But Monungai, Ben Johnson, the coach for Chicago, said Monungai is the one with the hot hand right now. So they may be looking for Monungai a little bit more today than normal. But, DeAndre Swift, I think I looked at some statistics for him, right? So even though they're saying that Monungai might get a little bit of work, let's not sleep on DeAndre Swift, because he has scored a touchdown in both career games that he has played against the New York Giants. Okay. And let's talk about the New York Giants pass defense real quick. Now, before we talk about that, let's talk about the weather. All right. Let me update rotogrinders.com. I'm seeing that there are some winds that could impact the longer kicks and longer throws in this game. Okay. Which I'm not I'm not overly concerned with. Now, I do have the Bears with the passing advantage in this game. I do have the Bears with the passing advantage in this game. And normally I would be like, man, that stinks, right? But I'm looking here, and the Giants haven't allowed a ton of 40-plus yard receiving plays. They've only allowed 2 this season. So even if it were optimal weather conditions, I think, attacking the Giants through the long ball is a tall task. I think that they're going to have to kind of pick them a little bit. Shorter throws, not just because of the weather, but just because of the Giants' defense. Now, that leads me back to DeAndre Swift. The Giants have allowed the 10th most receiving yards to running backs this season and the 9th most receptions to running backs this season. DeAndre Swift, over under 12.5 receiving yards last that I checked. He's gone over that in 5 out of 7 games this season. He did not go over that in the 2 career games. Excuse me. The 2 career games that he played against the Giants, he didn't go over that. So, but the receptions over 2.5, he's gone over that in 4 out of 7 games this season, and he had gone over that in 1 out of 2 career games against the Giants. So, I do think both of those spots are good places to look for a player prop. Which one? It just really depends on what you value more. Do you like the fact that DeAndre Swift has gone over the receiving yards in 1 more game than the receptions? Or do you like the fact that DeAndre Swift has gone over the reception line in 1 out of 2 career games compared to Swift in 0 out of 2 career games against the Giants? I think I got to lean more towards the receptions. I don't like it whenever – I know that's a small sample size, 2 games, but we can't take away from the fact that he does not have hasn't gone over the receiving yards in 2 career games against the Giants. No, I do see that Chicago has a big rushing advantage in this game, and that's what this might come down to, right? We talked about how these weather conditions may not be optimal, so who is going to establish that run game? And I have to believe it's going to be the Chicago Bears today. The Giants have allowed the 2nd most rushing yards per game to opposing teams this season. They have also allowed the most rushing yards per attempt. So when teams are rushing the ball against the Giants, they're getting quality gains against them. And Monangai ranks 5th best in the NFL in rushing yards per carry, and DeAndre Swift ranks 20th. So I think those guys could have some big runs in this game. And let's go see how big. How many 40-plus rushing plays are the Giants? How many have they allowed this season? They've allowed 3, and the Titans have allowed the most with 5. So what about 20-plus rushing yard plays? The Giants are right behind the Dolphins. The Dolphins have allowed 11 this season. The Giants have allowed 10. So, Swift, Monangai, I think those guys could have some big gains in this one. And then, let's talk about the lines here. Swift over under 52.5 rushing yards. He has gone over that in 4 out of 7 games this season, and he did go over that in 1 out of 2 career games against the Giants. Monangai, I'm reading on rotowire.com here that they said that Ben Johnson, head coach of the Bears, said, Monangai has the hot hand right now. They may be leaning towards on him a little bit more in this game. Now, he has only gone over that line in 2 out of 8 games this season, and he's never played against the Giants. So it's tough for me to pinpoint which one's going to do good. Wouldn't be surprised to see them both do good, but I gotta lean towards, maybe Swift with the yards is what I'm naturally feeling. And then maybe Monangai touchdown. But I like Swift touchdown though. He's gone over. He's got a touchdown in both career games against the Giants. So maybe both of them get in. And then Caleb Williams, I do have to mention that the Giants have allowed the 5th most rushing yards to quarterbacks this season, and Caleb Williams has gone over the 18.5 rushing line in 4 out of 8 games this season, although he has never played against the Giants throughout his career. Wan'Dale Robinson, says Ivan. Wan'Dale Robinson over 51.5 receiving yards. Let's go take a look. Now, The Bears, their pass defense is also weak. They rank 25th in passing yards allowed per game. The Bears are also allowing a big chunk of yardage when teams are passing the ball against them. They've allowed the fourth most yards per completion this season. Wan'Dale Robinson ranks second best on this team with Neighbors being out in yards per catch. And he ranks 62nd best in the NFL. So just based on that, I think there's a good chance Wan'Dale Robinson can pick up some big gains here. But how big? Is he getting a lot of yards after the catch, or is he catching long gains? That's another factor that I haven't really brought up, but that is a factor, right? Especially in a game where there could be some detrimental winds that impact the long ball. So receiving 40-plus yard gains allowed by Chicago. They've allowed just as many as that's offense. Receiving 40-plus yards. The Bears haven't been too vulnerable allowing that. The Bears have allowed the second most 20-plus yard receptions this season. And then let's just go take a look at how many Wan'Dale Robinson has this season with 20-plus yard receptions. I mean, 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He's picking. Yeah, man. I think it is definitely doable. Also, Chicago has limited wide receiver receptions very well this year. They rank 7th best in actually limiting those receptions. But we're not talking about that, right? We're talking about those receiving yards. Wan'Dale Robinson, over 55.5 last I checked. I don't know if you said another number here, 51.5. So it's gone down maybe because of the weather. But he had gone over the 55.5 in 3 out of 9 games this season. He's never played against Chicago. And when we look at this Giants target share, this Giants team, I'm looking at fantasysp.com, and Wan'Dale Robinson leads this team in target share. The next guy up is going to be Theo Johnson, unless it's, a running back, but it's not. Theo Johnson, which, Chicago has been more vulnerable to receiving yards allowed to wide receivers than they have been at receiving yards allowed to tight ends. Also, Wan'Dale Robinson is getting more targets than Theo Johnson. And I have that being one of Chicago's biggest positional defensive vulnerabilities relative to the other teams in the league is the receiving yards allowed to wide receivers and receptions allowed to tight ends. Not receiving yards, but, Theo Johnson, over and under 3.5 receptions. He's gone over that in 2 out of 9 games this season, and he's never played against the Bears. So, I mean, it's tough for me to like that prop, but if you do, you may have reasons that I haven't had time to look into that you like the Theo Johnson receptions. Chicago does rank 9th worst in receptions allowed to tight ends this season. But yeah, I think that's got to be the guy that the Giants lean on today. Okay, is Wan'Dale Robinson through that passing game, and maybe the Giants pass the ball a little bit to Tyrone Tracy. I mean, that's another thing that we may have to consider here is Tyrone Tracy. I don't know what his over-under is or anything like that, but Chicago hasn't been great nor terrible at allowing receiving yards and receptions to running backs. So, I think he's also somebody worth considering, especially if the Giants are trailing in this game, in the later stages of the game and need to throw the ball. Yeah. So now on the flip side, let's get to these comments a little bit here. Would it be wise to take Dart rushing yards today? It's going to feel like 25 degrees in Chicago. I don't think he's played in cold weather this year. He might have to run the ball to stay warm. Yeah. You know, Chicago hasn't been extremely vulnerable or great at preventing rushing yards by quarterbacks, but I think that's one of the strong points of this Giants offense is Dart running the ball. And just to give you a specific number here, I mean, the Bears have allowed the third, sixth, ninth, 12th most rushing yards to quarterbacks this season. So, and I think a game where that win could be even more impactful. Yeah, I mean, just to stay warm, he might have to run. Not just to stay warm, but just to move the ball with these bad wind conditions. And Chicago is more vulnerable, man. Chicago is more vulnerable. Well, passing yards allowed per game, they rank 25th, and the same with rushing yards allowed per game. But the Giants, they rank 14th in rushing yards per game, 19th in passing yards per game. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where they have to get it done at. So if you like the Giants to compete in this game, I think one of their strategies has to be utilizing Jackson Dart on the ground there. I think Ivan says I think the Giants have hit their team total line in a few games versus the Bears on the road. Also, yeah, let's go check that out. So team total for the New York Giants is 20.5. You said New York Giants, right? And then Giants versus Bears history. How many times have the Giants scored 21 plus points on the road against the Bear? The Giants did not. They only scored 3 points in their last game at Chicago. And you said the Giants, right? I think the Giants have hit their team total against the Bears. Okay. They have not gone over that team total in the last 2 games at Chicago. They have not gone over that in the last 3 games at Chicago. 1 out of 4 times, 2 out of 5. So 2 out of the last 5 games that the Giants have played at Chicago, they've gone over that team total. But they haven't gone over that in the past 3 games. The most points that the Giants have scored at Chicago is 14 in the last 3 games. Yeah, Ivan says that he loves the over. Also, I do not. I don't really like specialize in over under game totals, but here's a couple things that I will say is that the Giants are 5-4 to the over this season. So more times than not, the Giants are going over whatever that line is set at. And the Bears are 5-2-1 to the over. And I think a lot of people are going to be a little hesitant on taking the over in a bad weather game. So I think that's an added benefit of it. If you like to fade the public, I think that's another added benefit of this game. And, both of these defenses are not very good. So I'd have to lean towards that over there too, Ivan. Now, what is that line set at? Let's go take a look real quick, and let's just go take a look how many times these teams have gone over that line throughout their history. It's at 46.5. So they've only gone over that in 0 out of 1, 0 out of 2, 0 out of 3, 0 out of 4, 1 out of their last 5 games between each other. They have gone over that line. So that's not great history for that, but I got to lean with it too today, Ivan. Jonathan Taylor touchdown. Yep. That really comes to no surprise there. I mentioned him earlier this morning. I really mention him every dang week. He's really good. But yeah, Jonathan Taylor. What did I have for his touchdowns? Oh, he had scored one career touchdown in one career game against Atlanta, so I thought that looked pretty decent there. And then all the other stuff we were talking about. How Indianapolis was on my radar to be one of the better teams to score touchdowns today. Yeah, 14 in the last 3 games there, Ivan. But let's just talk about some Odunze and stuff, DJ Moore a little bit, and then get a prediction in for this one and move on. Odunze, the Giants have allowed the 4th most receiving yards to wide receivers this season, the 3rd most receptions to wide receivers this season. Odunze over under 55.5 receiving yards. He's gone over that in half of his games this season. He's never played against the Giants. I think DJ Moore, when I'm looking at how many times a player has gone over a receiving or reception line out of Odunze, DJ Moore, and Zacchaeus. DJ Moore looks like the best. He's gone over the 41.5 receiving line in 6 out of 8 games this season, and he's gone over that in 3 out of 3 career games against the Giants. So I think DJ Moore would be the guy that I'd be looking for if you like any of the Chicago receivers. He has also had a touchdown in 1 out of 3 career games against the Giants. So I think that looks pretty solid there. Zacchaeus, he's gone over his 30.5 receiving line in 3 out of 5 career games against the Giants. He's also had a touchdown in 1 out of 5 career games against the Giants. Not necessarily something that I'm looking for, but his reception line, Zacchaeus, is something that I was thinking about maybe taking an under on, even though the Giants have allowed the 3rd most receptions to wide receivers. The only reason why I say that is because he hasn't gone over the 3.5 reception line in all 5 career games against the Giants. So had me thinking about that a little bit there. Also, if you were thinking about Darius Slayton anytime touchdown for the Giants today, he has not had a touchdown in any career games against the Chicago Bears. 0 for 3. That doesn't mean it won't happen today. It could happen, But anyways, what else do we have here? Chicago's allowed Caleb Williams ranks 6th worst in passing yards allowed to quarterbacks. Caleb Williams over under 220.5. He's gone over that in 4 out of 8 games this season. So I do give Chicago a good-sized rushing advantage, especially now that Scadaboo's out. Even if Scadaboo was in, I'd still give the Bears a good rushing advantage. But the fact that he's out, I think it could be even bigger. I give Chicago a good-sized 3rd down conversion advantage, a slight red zone conversion advantage. No clear red zone attempts per game advantage, but I do got to lean towards Chicago in that department. No clear sacks on the quarterback advantage. So I think this is a grimy game, that I'm getting involved with here for my but there's, in my eyes, there's no easy route. I have some other reasons why I like the Bears in this game and whatnot. And like I said, I thought about taking Buffalo, but yeah, I'm going to rock with the Bears in this one, and I got to lean for the Bears to cover. Let's move on to another game here. So, we talked about Atlanta, Indianapolis, Buffalo, Miami. We talked about Baltimore and Minnesota, Cleveland and the Jets. There's not much that I have to say about this game because both of these defenses, there's a couple things that I'll mention real quick about this game. Cleveland leads the all-time series 16-14 against the Jets. The Jets are better against the spread than the Cleveland is this year. They're 4-4. Cleveland's 3-5 against the spread. I do give Cleveland a slight passing advantage in this game. Give the Jets a big rushing advantage. The Jets a slight third down conversion advantage, a slight red zone conversion advantage. Cleveland, I give them a slight red zone attempts per game advantage and a big sacks on the quarterback advantage. Judkins, I did mention that I give the Jets a big rushing advantage in this game, but the only reason why I didn't look into Jets rushing props is because Cleveland's rush defense is pretty good, and the Jets rush defense is weak. So I think Judkins, even though I'm giving, alligator touchdown, oh, well, shit. I got to look at something real quick now that you said an alligator touchdown. All right. Way to go, alligator. I'm playing. I got like this little fantasy thing going on, and I got JT and alligator. But where was I? Oh, yeah. Judkins over under 80.5 rushing yards. The Jets' rush defense is bad. They rank 26 in rushing yards allowed per game. And Judkins has gone over the 80.5 rushing line in 4 out of 7 games this season. Now, he's a rookie, hasn't played against the Jets. The Jets have also allowed the 8th most rushing yards to running backs. They allow some pretty significant gains when teams are running the ball against them, and Judkins is pretty decent at picking up those gains. So I think, if you're thinking about Judkins, not a spot that I necessarily am too knowledgeable about, to be honest with you, but I think if you like it, yeah, I don't see anything that makes me say no. And then Breece Hall, anytime touchdown, possibly in my notes I have here. Now, Cleveland does have a good overall defense, but I had to just look up, Breece Hall, and he's scored a touchdown in both career games against Cleveland. And both of them were receiving, but the Browns haven't allowed a receiving touchdown to a running back this season. So, all in all, I got to lean towards Cleveland in this one. I also think Jerry Jeudy could pick up maybe a big gain or two. But didn't we say that there was something weather related in this one as well? Maybe this looks like it'd be pretty okay, is what I'm seeing here. So Jeudy I think could pick up some good gains here. Let me see how many. The Jets haven't allowed a 40-plus yard receiving play this year, and they've actually done good at limiting 20-plus receiving plays. So I think it's got to be. That doesn't make sense to me. How are the Jets? How are they ranked 27th in opponent yards per completion, but they're not allowing 20-plus yard a lot of 20-plus yard receiving gains or 40-plus. Oh, this is offense. Yeah, that didn't seem right. The Jets have allowed a decent amount of 20-plus receiving plays, 40-plus. I guess it's a solid amount. Yeah, I got my eyes on Jeudy for Cleveland. If if you guys like him, I think he's in a decent spot. He's good at yards per catch. Jets are bad at allowing yards per catch, and Cleveland likes to throw the ball. Cleveland ranks 3rd in the NFL in passing play percentage. The Jets are more run-focused with their play calling percentage. They rank 22nd in passing play percentage. So I think it's going to be, basically Cleveland. They got to use Judkins, man. I feel like Cleveland has to get away from passing the ball so much and use Judkins. And That's about all I got for that game. Give me Cleveland here. Give me Cleveland. I have to lean towards Cleveland. Looks like the Colts just scored a touchdown though. Ooh, my guess this is going to be Downs or Pittman. Pierce. Well, that's good for the spread there. But yeah, I mean Pierce, he's a deep ball threat too, and he picks up. I mean, I remember earlier this year, and he probably is still up there in yards per catch. And the only reason why I wasn't thinking the only reason why I was hesitant about him doing good, Pierce, is because Atlanta had ranked 5th best in opponent yards per completion. And then receiving defense, Atlanta. They hadn't allowed a lot of 40-plus yard receptions, which that one looks like it was 37. But the Falcons had allowed the fewest 20-plus yard receiving plays this season, the fewest. And there was a 37-yarder right there. So, I mean, that kind of just tells you how good the Colts are, That's impressive. But yeah, let me get Cleveland -1.5. New England and Tampa Bay. New England's won the last 4 out of 5 games against Tampa Bay. Hunter Henry needs 105 receiving yards to reach 5,000 career receiving yards milestone. If you're interested in that. We already mentioned a lot of injuries in this game earlier. I got to give New England the slight passing advantage. I give New England a slight rushing advantage, a big third down conversion advantage, a slight red zone conversion advantage, a good-sized red zone attempts per game advantage. The only true advantage that I can give Tampa Bay is the big sacks on the quarterback advantage, which with these younger quarterbacks like Drake May, that could be real big of a problem. Now, Drake May is one of the younger quarterbacks that I trust, but if there was ever a situation where, I mean, the Patriots have not been good at protecting Drake May this season. And Tampa Bay has been good at sacking the quarterback. But even though Tampa Bay even though New England's struggling at protecting Drake May, they still have that 7-2 record, So they're getting it done through other facets of the game. And I'm thinking that's probably the way I'm going to lean. I think it's really bad that they have Ramondre Stevenson and Boutte out today. I know Boutte seemed like one of the more popular targets here, man. For New England, for Drake May, seemed like there seemed to be a good relationship there. I mean, he does lead third. He does rank 3rd on the team in target share this season. And with him being out, maybe it goes to Douglas a little bit more. But yeah, Stephon Diggs does lead the team in target share and all that. Tampa Bay ranks 22nd in passing yards allowed per game. Rushing yards allowed per game, Tampa Bay is much better at defending against. So I feel like New England has to pass the ball in this one to have a solid chance at winning. And I'm looking, at I think they're going to have to pass it to these wide receivers, New England. Tampa Bay, or excuse me. I would maybe I didn't look into it because they didn't have a line for it yet, guys. But I would look into, if you're interested, or if you already have it on your radar, Ramondre Stevenson, receiving yards or receptions. Tampa Bay or excuse me, not Stevenson, Travion Henderson. Um, Travion Henderson does lead the team in target share and receptions this season. Stevenson accumulated more yards, um, but Tampa Bay has allowed the most receiving yards to running backs and the sixth most receptions to running backs. So if you like Travion Henderson today, you got that working with you. Now New England really likes to run the ball in regards to play calling percentage. I just don't think that this is a good spot to do it against Tampa Bay. I think you're going to have to open up a little bit more and pass. But, Tampa Bay hasn't been extremely vulnerable to the wide receiver position in regards to, yards allowed per game. They've been about middle of the pack in yards allowed per game. Same with receptions. It looks like they've been a little bit more vulnerable to receptions than yards relative to the other teams in the league. So I got some, Stephon Diggs receiving yards and or receptions looks pretty solid here. He's gone over both of those lines in 4 out of 9 games this season. So more times than not, he's gone under the receiving yard line and receptions line. By the way, his receiving yard line, last that I checked, was at 56.5 yesterday. The reception line at 4.5. Only went over that in 4 out of 9 games this season, which isn't terrible. But he's gone over both of those lines in all 3 games that he's ever played against Tampa Bay. So I like that. And then he's scored exactly 2 touchdowns in 1 out of 3 career games against Tampa Bay. He didn't score in the other 2 games, but in one of those games, he did score 2+ touchdowns. So, Tampa Bay touchdowns allowed to wide receivers this year. They've done good at limiting those. So that's a concern. But I'm not necessarily, loving or disliking Stephon Diggs to get a touchdown today. But I like that 3 out of 3 career games against Tampa Bay. He's gone over the receiving yards and receptions, and that's obviously the bigger the sample size, the better. But if you do like Stephon Diggs to go either over those lines today, I'd have to lean towards it more than not liking it. And then that's about all I got for New England's receiving game. I did mention Hunter Henry needs, 105 receiving yards to reach the 5,000 career receiving yards milestone. I didn't look into his receiving yards simply because Tampa Bay has allowed the 10th fewest receiving yards to tight ends this season. But I did just want to throw out there that Hunter Henry has scored a touchdown in 1 out of 3 career games against Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay has allowed 4 receiving touchdowns to tight ends this season, which is about average. So if you like that, maybe for an anytime touchdown, there you have it. Something else I just want to bring up is Drake May over 29.5 rushing yards. Tampa Bay has allowed the 7th most rushing yards to quarterbacks this season. And Drake May has gone over that line in 4 out of 9 games this season. Drake May has also averaged more yards per carry on turf than grass in both seasons that he's played in. This game is being played on grass. So that makes me a little skeptical about the Drake May rushing yards. This game's being played on grass, but he's averaged more yards per carry on turf than grass than both seasons that he's played in. He's also averaged more yards per carry at home than the road in both seasons that he's played in, and this game's on the road. So, even though Tampa Bay's vulnerable to those rushing yards to quarterbacks, I'm going to have to lean towards Drake May not getting over that. And then let's Get to some of these comments here. Yeah, I can't wait for the Patriots-Bucks game, says Ivan. I'm thinking Mayfield going to bring Patriots back down to earth today. Bucks -2.5. I'm kind of getting that feeling too, going through the player props. Diggs balling today. I don't care what the stats say. I got him in a slip 50 yards. Yeah, I'm thinking Diggs is going to come out here and show out a little bit today. And I think the Patriots need that. Now, let's go see where this Patriots defense is vulnerable. They rank 19th in passing yards allowed per game, and they rank first in rushing yards allowed per game. And Tampa Bay hasn't been good at running the ball this year, so I think it's got to be the Baker Mayfield show for Tampa Bay today. Now, New England has allowed the 7th most passing yards to quarterbacks this season. Baker Mayfield, over under 243.5 passing yards is what I see here. Now, he's only gone over that in 3 out of 8 career games against New England, and he has not gone over that in 2 career – excuse me, let me backtrack. He's only gone over that in 3 out of 8 games this season, and he has not gone over that line in 2 career games against New England. So, the current and historical data is not favorable for Baker Mayfield to go over that today. But this is maybe a spot where I go against that statistic. I think that's going to be Tampa Bay's best chance to move the ball. And New England is vulnerable to those passing yards allowed to quarterbacks. Now let's talk about Rachaad White a little bit. Over under 20.5 receiving yards, over under 3.5 receptions. So the receiving yards, New England has allowed the 4th most receiving yards to running backs this season. Rachaad White has gone over the 20.5 receiving yard line in half of his games this season. He's never played against New England, but Rachaad White has averaged more yards per catch on grass than turf in 3 out of 4 career seasons that he's played in. So, once again, this game is being played on grass. He's averaged more yards per catch on grass than turf in 3 out of 4 career seasons that he's had. So, I got to like that. And receptions over under 3.5. Only gone over that in 3 out of 8 games this season. I have to lean more towards those receiving yards for Rachaad White. Also worth mentioning, New England ranks 20th in opponent yards per completion. So there could be some opportunity here for Rachaad White to pick up some good chunk of yardage whenever he does catch the ball here. Tampa Bay also likes to pass. They rank 12th in passing play percentage. Cade Otton, somebody I have on my list here, really just because New England has allowed the 7th most New England has allowed the 7th most receiving yards to tight ends, the 9th most receptions to tight ends. And Cade Otton, 43.5 receiving yards, 4.5 receptions. Last that I checked, is over under. He's gone over the receiving line in 3 out of 7 games this season. Receptions, 2 out of 7. There's nothing that I really love about the Cade Otton play today, but I had to bring it up because of New England's tight end vulnerability. So I think that this is a spot today where I would normally go with New England. But the NFL and really sports are all about matchups, right? And I think the Buccaneers match up against New England pretty well. And, the reason being is because Tampa Bay is not a good rushing team. Let's say that Tampa Bay was a good rushing team and bad at passing. Then I'd be leaning more towards New England in this one. But, New England is very good at limiting those rushing yards per game. And Tampa Bay, not only are they not good at running the ball, but they just really don't opt to a whole lot. They call a higher percentage of passing plays relative to the other teams in the leagues. And that's what I think beats New England, is the passing. If they can establish that run, great. But New England is more vulnerable to those passing yards allowed per game, which Tampa Bay is better at passing the ball than running. So I think I like Tampa Bay here again today too. Ivan, Tampa Bay. And then we'll move on to another game. Let me read through you guys' comments real quick. Yeah, Tampa Bay -2.5. Betters May passing yards. What do you think? I want to put them for 200 plus. Yeah, so Tampa Bay doesn't have a great pass defense either, right? They rank 22nd in passing yards allowed per game. And New England is a solid passing team. They rank 9th best in passing yards per game. Tampa Bay hasn't been extremely great nor terrible at limiting quarterbacks passing the ball. So, Drake May, this is what his second season. So it's tougher for me, as you know, I say this all the time. It's tougher for me to pinpoint what rookies and sophomores are going to do because I have less historical data to work with. But, he's gone over the 200-plus yard line in every single game this season, Ivan. And, why would that stop here today against, I already mentioned that I think New England will have to throw the ball to be successful in this game. And because Tampa Bay's rush defense is good. I think that's what this game solely comes down to is who's going to throw better. I do think Tampa Bay throws it better today, but Drake May's had 200 plus passing yards in every game this season, Ivan. So it's hard to go against a trend like that. And last year he had there were just a few games that he didn't go over that. So I think that's a pretty comfortable situation there. And I do want to mention, though, I don't love Tampa Bay today. I just lean with them to cover today. New England does lead the all-time series, 7-3 against Tampa Bay. New England's also won the last 4 out of 5 games against Tampa Bay. So, but I do got to lean with Tampa Bay in this one. And I think, once again, what it comes down to is who's going to pass the ball better. I didn't look into the Tampa Bay receiver props simply because New England hasn't been great nor terrible at defending against the specific wide receiver position. But, I know that New England ranks 20th in opponent yards per completion. So they're allowing a good chunk of yardage when teams are completing the ball. And the Buccaneers have a lot of guys who are good at yards per catch. Ibuka ranks 6th best in the NFL in yards per catch. Tez Johnson ranks 24th best in the NFL in yards per catch. I already mentioned New England's vulnerable to that tight end position. Cade Otton is in the top 100 in yards per catch. Sterling Shepard, same thing. Bucky Irving, he's out today. But, they have a lot of guys that can do that. Now, receiving defense, how many 20-plus yard gains is New England allowing? They've allowed the second most this year. They've allowed the second most 20-plus yard receiving gains. So, we could go look at Ibuka, Tez Johnson, Sterling Shepard, Cade Otton. Who has the most out of all of these? My guess would be Ibuka. Who has the most 20-plus yard gains out of, those 4 players this season? Ibuka has 2, 4, 5, 9, 10, 11. So Ibuka has 11 20-plus yard gains, receiving gains this season against the team who's allowed the second most 20-plus yard receiving gains. And then I'm trying to find Tez Johnson here. Tez Johnson has had 3. Sterling Shepard has had 6. K. Dotton has had 5. So I think maybe the odd man out is I forgot if it was Tez Johnson or Sterling Shepard, but I think Ibuka can, have some 20+ yard catches in this one. So yeah, leaning that way. Tet McMillan, New Orleans and Carolina, Jacksonville and Houston. Personally, I'm not really too thrilled about those games. Here's a game that I think is interesting, right? Detroit and Washington. Detroit and Washington. Let me take a drink here. We've been live for a little bit. I think some other guys might want to get on the show here too. So let me break this game down. If you guys have any specific questions, feel free to let me know. I'll just briefly go over the other games and we can call it a session here. So Detroit, Washington, the series is tied 1-1 between the Lions and the Commanders. This game is being played on grass. I have Detroit as one of the best teams to score touchdowns today. Washington is most vulnerable to wide receiver receiving touchdowns and tight end receiving touchdowns. This makes me like St. Brown anytime touchdown scorer, makes me want to look into it, right? St. Brown, anytime touchdown. He's the third leader in the NFL in red zone targets. And Laporta, he ranks second on the team in red zone targets. Both of these guys have scored touchdowns against Washington throughout their careers as well. Something else worth considering is the fact that Washington has allowed the most 20+ yard receiving plays and the most 40+ yard receiving plays. St. Brown doesn't have any catches for 40+ yards this season, but he has 7 catches for 20+ yards. Laporta doesn't have any 40+ yard catches this season, but he does have 6 catches for 20+ yards. The deep threat seems like Jameson Williams, who has 6 catches for 20+ yards and 2 catches for 40+ yards. So I think Williams has a decent chance to get a long touchdown or pick up that 40-yard plus gain, although he didn't get a touchdown in his only career game against Washington. Also, as a team, Detroit doesn't pick up a lot of 40-yard plays. I have in my notes here, but they're decent at getting those 20-yard plus plays. So my favorite touchdown scorers in this order are going to be St. Brown, Laporta, and Jameson Williams. All right. St. Brown, over under 79.5 receiving yards. He's gone. Washington has allowed the second most receiving yards to wide receivers this season. St. Brown, over under 79.5 receiving yards. He's gone over that in half of his games this season. He's also gone over that line in both career games against Washington. He had 116 and 137 receiving yards in both career games that he's played against Washington. He scored exactly 2 touchdowns in 1 out of 2 career games against Washington. He's the third leader in the NFL in red zone targets. Why did I look at that? It's because Detroit has a big red zone attempts per game advantage. Detroit ranks 5th best in the NFL at entering the red zone. Washington is below average, slightly below average, and allowing teams to enter the red zone on them. So I think Detroit is going to have a lot of opportunities to score touchdowns when they enter the red zone today. Not just getting into the red zone, but when they are in, I think they're going to have a good chance of scoring touchdowns. Detroit ranks 6th best in the NFL at converting touchdowns when they are in the red zone. Washington is near the bottom of the league in allowing red zone touchdowns. Once again, St. Brown, leader on the team in red zone, or leader on the team, sure, but third leader in the NFL in red zone targets. And then the second leader on the team is Laporta in those red zone targets. So, Washington, they've allowed, let's just go see receiving touchdowns allowed by Washington. They've allowed the third most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this season. They've allowed the second most receiving touchdowns to tight ends this season. And I already mentioned Laporta has scored a touchdown in 1 out of 1 career games against Washington. So his only game against them. I think I would have to lean more towards St. Brown getting over the 79.5 receiving yards more than Laporta getting over the 44.5 receiving yards, simply because Washington has been more vulnerable to receiving yards allowed to wide receivers than they have been to receiving yards allowed to tight ends relative to the other teams in the league. They rank second worst in receiving yards allowed to wide receivers, whereas they rank ninth worst in receiving yards allowed to tight ends. I also like that St. Brown history against Washington, where he's gone over that line in 2 out of 2 career games against Washington, the 79.5 receiving yards. Yes, Laporta has gone over in his only career game against Washington, but the fact that we have another game with a bigger sample size with St. Brown makes me feel decent about that. I mentioned Jameson Williams is the biggest deep threat, 40-plus yard deep threat I see for Detroit today. I see his over-under at 47.5. Although he doesn't have good history against Washington achieving that, he hasn't gone over that in only 1 career game against Washington, and he doesn't have great history here. He's only gone over that line in 3 out of 8 games this season. I can't, take away from the fact that Washington allows. I already mentioned it earlier, but I think I mentioned that they allow the most 40-plus yard receiving plays, and it seems like Jameson Williams is that 40-plus receiving yard threat for Detroit. Washington, their pass defense is just bad. Rush defense, Washington's rush defense isn't great either. Gibbs and Montgomery are guys to not take lightly here. I'd have to lean more towards Gibbs getting a touchdown than Montgomery. Although, no, I'm not even going to mention that. Anyways, Washington has allowed the 10th most rushing yards to running backs, which made me look into Gibbs and Montgomery rushing yards. Gibbs has gone over his 71.5 rushing yard line in 3 out of 8 games this season. And Montgomery's gone over his 47.5 rushing line in 3 out of 8 games this season. Gibbs has gone over that in 1 career game against Washington. He had 105 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns in the playoffs last season. And then Montgomery has gone over that line in 2 out of 3 games against Washington, which is solid. But, I mentioned Gibbs scored 2 touchdowns against Washington in the playoffs last season. But Montgomery has never scored a touchdown against Washington in 3 career games. So that makes me a little hesitant for Montgomery touchdown here today. And then rushing touchdowns allowed by Washington to running backs. They've been limiting that pretty good. What about receiving touchdowns allowed to running backs? They're about average. So that's why I was leaning more towards the receivers for Detroit. Because Washington's been more vulnerable at allowing those types of touchdowns. Free money, Monty 10+ receiving yards. Yeah, he's gone over those 11.5 receiving yards in 4 out of 8 games this season, 2 out of 3 career games against Washington. So, really, for on the other side of the ball, I do want to mention real quick, Jared Goff has gone over the 250.5 passing yard line in 3 out of 4 career games against Washington, but only 3 out of 8 games this season. And something else I want to mention with this receiving corp for the Lions, Jameson Williams ranks 4th best, so he's real good at yards per catch. And then Laporta ranks 44th. Amon-Ra St. Brown ranks 76th. Washington allows the most yards per catch than any team in the league this season. And Yeah. For Washington, really the guy I have on my list that I'm kind of looking at here is Zach Ertz. I didn't really look into his receiving props or anything like that, but I did see, he's only scored a touchdown in 1 out of 5 career games against Detroit. This would be a game where I'd be just absolutely dumbfounded if Detroit lost, and honestly didn't cover, but it happens. It's football. It's the NFL. But yeah, I'm not. Give me Detroit here, maybe even by a large margin. Average margin of victory, NFL. We can look that up. Average scoring margin, something that we could look at. The Lions ranked 7th best in the NFL in that average scoring margin. Washington ranked 17th. So there's not too much of a difference there. What about like how about this? How about we look at the Lions when they are on the road? Ooh, they're minus 1.5. Their average margin of victory is minus 1.5. When Washington's at home, it's plus 1.8. But so maybe the Lions don't. Maybe this is just the weird game of the week where the Lions struggle or something. I don't know. Naturally, I just don't see where Washington has a chance here. Now I think it's gonna Detroit. I mean, they're pretty good. They're a pretty good defensive team. Maybe Mariota rushing. Um, I mean, Mariota's got to play pretty good if Washington competes in this one. And then I'm just going to breeze through these other games as quickly as possible. I think we only have 3 more games here. New Orleans Saints at Panthers. Saints Kamara needs 88 receiving yards to reach 5,000 career receiving yards milestone. If you were thinking about Kamara for that, you got that working for you now. I think we mentioned that Kamara is questionable to play in this game. And let's go see if we have anything, any clarification. We don't yet. But, he needs 88 more receiving yards. Carolina hasn't been great or terrible at defending against receiving yards to running backs, but they have been bad at those receptions. Kamara's gone over the 2.5 reception line in 5 out of 9 games this season. In case I didn't mention it, Carolina has allowed the 6th most receptions to running backs, and Kamara has gone over that line in 10 out of 14 career games against Carolina. He's also scored a touchdown in 8 out of 14 career games against Carolina, but he's only scored 2+ touchdowns in 2 out of 14 career games against them. So what? If you're not getting 7-1 or better on Kamara, 2+ touchdowns, then probably not ideal there. And then Juwan Johnson, Carolina has allowed the 5th most receiving yards to tight ends. Juwan Johnson's gone over that in 5 out of 9 games this season, but only 1 out of 9 career games against Carolina. It says that he did play 10, but he wasn't targeted in that game. Then he's only scored a touchdown in 1 out of 9 career games against them. I think somebody that we got to look for here is Dowdle and Hubbard, right? The Saints are bad at defending rushing yards per game. They rank 24th in rushing yards allowed per game. Carolina is a good rushing team. They rank 5th best in rushing yards per game. Chuba Hubbard, over under 21.5 rushing yards last that I checked. He's gone over that in 6 out of 7 games this season. He's gone over that in 5 out of 8 career games against New Orleans. So I think that is a viable option there, especially considering that New Orleans ranks 6th worst in rushing yards allowed to running backs this season. And then Dowdle, he's only gone over the 91.5 rushing yard line in 3 out of 9 games this season. He didn't go over that in his only career game against New Orleans, and he didn't score a touchdown in that game either. Hubbard did score a touchdown in 2 out of 8 career games against New Orleans. And then Kamara, Carolina, they're not the best rush defense either. They're slightly below average, and they've allowed the seventh most rushing yards to running backs this season. Alvin Kamara, running back for the Saints. Once again, he's questionable, but last that I checked, over under listed at 36.5. He's gone over that in 4 out of 9 games this season. He's gone over that in 11 out of 14 career games against Carolina. He scored a touchdown, as I mentioned earlier, when I talked about his receiving props. He scored a touchdown in 8 out of 14 career games against Carolina, and then he scored 2+ touchdowns in 2 out of 14 career games against Carolina. So overall, Saints slight passing advantage, Carolina big rushing advantage, Saints slight third down conversion advantage, Carolina big red zone conversion advantage, good red zone attempts per game advantage, Saints slight sacks on the quarterback advantage. Carolina's at home. I know they were doing great at home earlier this year. I'm going to have to lean towards Carolina in this one as well. Also worth mentioning, Carolina is 6-3 against the spread. New Orleans is 2-3 against the spread. So let's move on to the next game here. Jacksonville and Houston. Today's Jacoby Myers' birthday. Isn't this his first game with his new team? Anyways, it's his birthday, and he needs 56 receiving yards to reach the 5,000 career receiving yards milestone. So kind of makes me want to look real quick to see what his line is at, because I don't think I saw a line for him earlier. 34.5. Well, if you like it, you got that working with you. Now, what I will say is that Houston's pass defense is good. They rank 4th best in passing yards allowed per game, and they rank 10th best in receiving, 4th best in receiving yards allowed to wide receivers. But Jacksonville, they have a bad pass defense. So if you like anybody for Houston, getting some yardage or receptions, you may have that going for you. A guy that I was specifically looking at was maybe Dalton Schultz. Okay, Jacksonville has allowed the 4th most receiving yards to tight ends this season. They've allowed the 5th most receptions to tight ends this season. Dalton Schultz has gone over the 36.5 receiving line in 4 out of 8 games this season, so half of his games. He's only gone over that line in 2 out of 6 career games against Jacksonville, and he's only had a touchdown in 1 out of 6 career games against Jacksonville. But this game is being played on turf, right? And Dalton Schultz has averaged more yards per catch on turf than grass in 6 out of 8 career seasons that he's had. So I think, that's doable there. I'd have to, that'd be the first spot that I would consider when thinking about a Houston prop. Now, I don't want to take away from Nico Collins or Xavier Hutchinson, because Jacksonville is allowing a good chunk of yardage when teams are completing passes against them. And when I'm looking at the defense here, Jacksonville has allowed a good chunk of 20+ yard receiving gains, and Jacksonville has allowed a decent amount of 40+ yard receiving gains. So if you're looking for that home run hitter today for Houston, I think that you're in a decent spot. Here's the thing, is Davis Mills is projected to start in this game. And I don't know necessarily what his tendencies are, right? But sometimes when you got the backup quarterback in, especially, I think this might be his first game, right? Let's go look. I'm pretty sure it's his first game starting this season. Maybe he did earlier this season, if I'm not mistaken. November 2nd. So that's a game to look at right there, I think. Who did he target against the Broncos in that game? Davis Mills. I'm going to go take a look at it. Davis Mills game log. The Broncos, they have a pretty good pass defense. They have a pretty good defense in general. But I just kind of want to see who Davis Mills was targeting in this game. Schultz, 8 targets. Now he did target Nico Collins 11 times, and Christian Kirk 8 times as well. Hutchinson 5. So those were the 4 top targets for him in that game. The main target being Nico Collins. It just happened that Dalton Schultz had 2 more receiving yards than Nico Collins in that game. So Schultz did more with less in regards to the receiving yardage. Receptions, Nico did get 1 more than Schultz. And then Christian Kirk, he had – what did he have against the Broncos? 26 receiving yards, 8 targets. And then Hutchinson. Who had the long one? Schultz. Schultz had the long completion, the longest catch in that game for Houston, 47 yards. And maybe that's the story here today. And I would have to think, Jacksonville has allowed more 20-plus yard receiving gains than Denver. Denver's actually allowed some 40-plus yard receiving gains. Wow. What about 20-plus? Denver's limited that a little bit better than the 40-plus. And Jacksonville is worse at allowing the 20-plus. So maybe they don't get the 40-plus yard catch here today. I mean, I think there's a decent chance that they do. But the Broncos, I didn't realize that they allowed the second most 40-plus yard receiving gains. So if the Broncos are going up against a team that now like in the future, if they're going up against a team that is good at getting 40-plus yard plays, you might want to check out those home run hitters in those games. Who do I like in this game? I don't know. Jacksonville 4-4 against the spread. Houston 3-5. Davis Mills at quarterback. I mean, that's just tough to go with there, but I don't think he's terrible. They only lost to Denver by 3. Now I know people they don't know really what to make of Denver right now, but Houston's slight passing advantage, Jacksonville's slight rushing advantage. No clear third down conversion advantage. Jacksonville's getting into the red zone a little bit more, and they're converting touchdowns a little bit more, and going up against a little bit of a weaker defense here. In regards to red zone conversion rates, the opponent red zone conversion rate, Houston hasn't been doing good. I did mention Houston's defense is good this season, but they've been allowing some touchdowns when teams do enter the red zone against them. Now, they've been good at preventing teams from entering the red zone on them, but Jacksonville's done a decent job at getting into the red zone. They rank 12th best in the NFL. Houston, good sacks on the quarterback advantage. Yeah, I mean, not a great advantage, but compared to what Jacksonville has. So, I don't know. I'm a little torn on this game. I suppose I'd have to just roll with, what is this, a pick'em? I guess give me Jacksonville in this one. I don't know. That's a stay away game for me. And then Rams at 49ers is one game that we need to cover. Pittsburgh at Chargers. I didn't have time to really look at the props in that one, but I do have some stuff listed down. Yeah, let's just go over this as quickly and efficiently as possible. Rams at San Francisco. San Francisco has a 13-7 all-time record against the Los Angeles Rams. lot of milestones can be hit in this. Stafford needs 2 touchdown passes to reach 400 career passing touchdowns. Davante Adams needs 7 receptions to reach 1,000 career receptions. Davante Adams needs 2 touchdowns to move into 18th place on the all-time career touchdowns leaders list. He would pass Sean Alexander, but the Rams play at home against the Seahawks next week, which Sean Alexander used to be the running back for the Seahawks. So maybe that will be a better time for Davante Adams to surpass Sean Alexander on that all-time careers touchdowns leaders list. That seems a little bit more fitting. But these teams played each other on this exact date, 11-9, 3 times throughout history. San Francisco won one of those games back in 1975, 24-23. The Rams won 41-30 back in 1969, and the Rams won 56-7 back in 1958. The Rams are better against the spread. They're 6-2. 49ers are 5-4. Brock Purdy, I mentioned at the very start of this segment that Brock Purdy is questionable to play in this game, but whether he plays or not, looks like Mac Jones will be that starting quarterback. Now I have the Rams having a slight passing advantage in this game. I have the Rams with a slight rushing advantage. San Francisco slight third down conversion advantage, although the Rams have their third down defense has been good. Rams slight red zone conversion advantage, a big red zone attempts per game advantage, a big sacks on the quarterback advantage. I like the Rams in this one. Rams. What is the line, Mick? Rams minus 5.5. It is a divisional game. We may have to, toggle that down to 2.5 or so, but just really depends on your comfort level. Maybe you like it at minus, 21.5 or so. So, but no, I mean, just if I had to lean one way on the line, yeah, give me the Rams here. They're the best passing team in the NFL in regards to yards per game, and San Francisco is below average at yards allowed per game. Now, San Francisco, I think, it can do good through the air as well. But rushing attack, I got to give the slight advantage here to the Rams as well. Here's what I'll say about McCaffrey, though. Okay, McCaffrey has scored a touchdown in 4 out of 5 career games against the Rams, and in 2 out of 5 of those games, he scored exactly 2 touchdowns. He's the 4th leader in the entire NFL in red zone target share. And, San Francisco, they're not great in the red zone, and they're not great at getting to the red zone. And the Rams defense has been good at preventing both of those. But, that is, a statistic that I was thinking about considering here. Also, I just want to mention, although the Rams are good at defending receiving yards to tight ends and receptions to tight ends, Kittle does have a touchdown in 7 out of 14 career games against the Rams. So in half of his games against the Rams, Kittle does have an anytime touchdown. The 49ers have allowed the 7th most receiving yards this season to opposing teams, the 4th most receptions. Nakua has gone over the 93.5 receiving line in 4 out of 7 games this season. Davante Adams has only gone over his 60.5 receiving line in 2 out of 8 games this season. I'd have to lean more towards Nakua having the better game here. Like I mentioned at the start, Davante Adams can break some records, specifically the all-time touchdown or the surpassing Sean Alexander in the career touchdowns leaders list. But the Rams play the Seahawks next week. I think that'll be a little bit more fitting for him to do that. Now, maybe Adams does get one today, but I kind of like him more next week, even though he may be going up against a tougher defense. I just like that storyline there. I can see it, on the front covers. Davante Adams surpasses Sean Alexander, and they played against Seattle. Anyways, Nakua, he's gone over the 7.5 reception line in 5 out of 7 games this season. And once again, San Francisco has allowed the fourth most receptions to wide receivers. So I think that is a viable option today if you're looking at that. Stafford has gone over the 266.5 passing yards in half of his games this season. San Francisco is below average. They rank 8th worst at passing yards allowed to quarterbacks this season. Now, San Francisco has allowed the second most receptions to running backs this season, but Kyren Williams has only gone over the 2.5 reception line in 25% of his games this season. So, I mean, if you like it, I like it. If you might have some other reasoning, like I said, this is more of a general research statistics type show. Now, I did mention some grass versus turf splits earlier, some home versus away splits earlier, but anyways, yeah, I'm leaning towards the Rams there. And then Sunday Night Football, bettors, can you please 10 the milestones for closing the live so I can rewatch and play some clips? Yeah, absolutely. Pittsburgh at Chargers. Pittsburgh leads the all-time series 25-11 against the Chargers. Keenan Allen needs 8 receptions to move into 13th place on the all-time receptions leaders list. He would pass Steve Smith. I looked to see if the Chargers played Carolina in the upcoming days, and they don't, much like that last one that we were talking about with Devontae Adams, how he could beat Sean Alexander and all that stuff. I was just seeing if the Chargers were the same way, and they don't play the Panthers here soon. But yeah, Keenan Allen needs 8 receptions to move into that moving to 13th place in the all-time receptions leaders list. And I wouldn't think that I think his line is probably going to be at 4.5. Let's go check what that receiving reception line is for him. Maybe 5.5. 4.5 at Plus Chicken, plus 104. So if you're thinking that, you got that going for you. Also, Pittsburgh has allowed the most receptions to wide receivers this season. Keenan Allen has gone over the 4.5 reception line in 3 out of 4 career games against Pittsburgh. I think these are, and he leads this team in target share. He's tied with McConkey. So I think, that seems like a pretty good spot to me. Also, the Chargers are the 6th best team in passing yards per game. There's no other team in the league that allows more passing yards per game than Pittsburgh. So, this is just a great spot, I feel like, for the Chargers passing attack. I didn't necessarily look into McConkey and Quentin Johnston, but I do think these are players worth looking in for. Even Gadsden, the tight end for the Chargers. Let's not sleep on him, man, because he's been having some big games, if I can remember correctly. And Pittsburgh has allowed the 6th most receiving yards to tight ends. Basically, Pittsburgh is just vulnerable everywhere. I would say they're best at limiting the running back out of all the passing statistics. They're best at limiting the running back receiving yards and receptions to running backs relative to the other teams in the league. And, Pittsburgh, the Chargers have Eckler out. No, he's with Washington now, but he's out anyways. But they got a lot of their running backs out. The Chargers do. But, yeah, so anyways, I think this is a great spot for this passing attack for the Chargers to exploit. And I don't really have anything listed here for Pittsburgh. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with because the Chargers have a good pass defense. They rank 3rd best. I think if Pittsburgh can establish a run with their 30th ranked rushing yard per game offense, that could be more beneficial against the Chargers, who are slightly below average in rushing yards allowed per game. But honestly, the only player prop that I have wrote down here for Pittsburgh is Aaron Rodgers over under excuse me, over under 0.5 rushing yards. So does Aaron Rodgers get a rushing yard or not in this game? The Chargers have allowed the fourth most rushing yards to quarterbacks this season, but I don't think this is a spot where it's like, okay, is Rodgers going to pick this up? It's like, is he going to? The question is he going to run or not? Not will he necessarily pick up X amount of yards? With somebody like Josh Allen earlier today, who I believe I said I liked his rushing yards going over. We if he stays healthy throughout the game, we feel pretty comfortable that he is going to at least get a few rushing attempts. With Rodgers, we don't know, but I think that's a spot where Rodgers has to get it done tonight, man. Let's see Rodgers get that rushing yard. Uh, who do I like in this game? I don't know. I mean, naturally, I'm thinking the Chargers, right? But weird things seem to happen. Seems like it happens more so on primetime games, And I'm not. Yeah, I think the Chargers are perfect in primetime games this season, and I'm just I'm gonna stick with the Chargers here to get this one, and yeah, Chargers -3. That's the way I'd lean on that one. And then let me go through all of the milestones, okay? All the milestones, and I'm gonna get out of here. Okay. We're gonna go through the milestones here. On which players could achieve milestones today. DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver from Minnesota, needs 6 receptions to reach 1,000 career receptions and 7 receptions to pass Hines Ward on the career receptions leaders list. Hopkins also needs 42 yards to move into 18th place on the all-time receiving yards leaders list. Hopkins needs 1 receiving touchdown to move into 19th place on the all-time receiving touchdowns leaders list. Hunter Henry needs 105 receiving yards to reach 5,000 career receiving yards milestone. Alvin Kamara needs 88 receiving yards to reach 5,000 career receiving yards milestone. Jakobi Meyers needs 56 receiving yards to reach the 5,000 career receiving yards milestone. Matt Stafford needs 2 touchdown passes to reach 400 career passing touchdowns. Davante Adams needs 7 receptions to reach 1,000 career receptions. Davante Adams needs 2 touchdowns to move into 18th place on the all-time career touchdowns leaders list. He would pass Sean Alexander, but the Rams play at home against the Seahawks next week, so maybe that situation will be a little bit more fitting since Sean Alexander used to play for Seattle. Keenan Allen needs 8 receptions to move into 13th place on the all-time receptions leaders list. He would pass Steve Smith. And that looks like about it. Thank you guys so much for engaging today and tuning in with the comments. This was a great show. Thank you guys also for dropping in your statistics, the plays that you like, and all that stuff, so everybody else can see you in chat. Yes, thank you to the sponsors: BetUS, MyBookie.ag, Walmart.com, Open Goal, and the MLB and NFL Pro Shops. Also, I say this in my basketball shows a lot, and I say it from time to time in my football shows. I'm not a huge fan of the parlays. If you are, I'm not judging you. But what I'm saying is that we do have a guy that does provide parlays. Southgate's parlays, $9.99 per day, $49.99 per week. I hear he's pretty good at what he does. Now, I haven't tried the services because I don't like parlays, but if you do, that option is available for you. If you scan that QR code at the top left-hand corner of the screen, you're gonna see all the information that we have for all of those sponsors that I just listed and the Southgate's parlays deal. So, but once again, yeah, guys, thank you for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know. And good luck today. Next time I see you guys, I won't be doing an NBA show today. That was a long NFL show, and I'll be focused on NFL for the day for the most part. I guess there's a rare chance I do an NBA show today, but that's doubtful. I'd say there's pretty decent chance tomorrow that we do the Monday Night Football show and maybe even a basketball NBA show for tomorrow. So I'll see you guys here soon. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great day. Not moved out.
This non-casual podcast may not be reproduced, retransmitted, or reused without the authorized written consent of the Not Moved Podcast Network. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed today's broadcast.